Good morning. Welcome to the 2016 Aspen Institute Symposium on the State of Race in America. I'm Kiahna Cassell, Project Director in the Aspen Institute Communications and Society program. The Aspen Institute, a neutral, nonprofit organization, aims to foster leadership based on enduring values and provide a nonpartisan venue for dealing with critical issues. We're delighted that you've joined us for our 6th annual symposium in partnership with our friends at Comcast Corporation. This symposium happens to be one of my personal favorites. An incredible group of speakers, a great dialogue. Does it get any better than that? I don't think so. We start the day with an opening presentation followed by 2 panel sessions. Immediately following the panels, we'll then go into our town hall conversation. And the town hall will be a chance for all of the participants and attendees to dig a little bit deeper into the topics and themes discussed throughout the day. For those who are joining the conversation at home, we encourage you to join the discussion on social media. The hashtag for the event is State of Race. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to our Executive Director of the Communications and Society program at the Aspen Institute, Charlie Firestone.
Thank you, Kiahna. This symposium will explore the opportunities and challenges for people of color in the 21st century. This year we'll look particularly at questions of race on campus and on changing demographics in cities and how they affect minorities' quality of life. So while we will consider how the country has made progress on the racial front, we'll also examine why familiar race-related problems persist and in fact intensified in the past year, and try to identify kernels of hope that can emerge from our new multiracial reality. So issues of race, as we all know, have plagued this country since its colonial times for over 300 years. We've struggled at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, during the Civil War, during Jim Crow, during the Civil Rights era, and on to today. There's been progress all along the way, of course, but we still face significant racial issues today and must deal effectively with these issues if our democracy is to survive. Today, the dialogue will touch on individual, cultural, institutional, and structural causes of racial problems, looking towards new and viable solutions in the context of our panel topics. We'll be defining these problems with the purpose of finding solutions, what you, we, and institutions can do to remove racial tensions. In other words, the purpose of this convening is to do what the Aspen Institute does best, which is to provide a safe, non-ideological space to have an informed and educated dialogue on the toughest issues of the day. Before we get into our session, we want to have a few thank yous. First of all, Kiahna Cassell, who's really shepherded this project for all 6 years of it, and really does the hard work putting it together. We also want to thank Juan Williams, who was the instigator of this session more than 6 years ago and came to the Aspen Institute with the idea and has been a mainstay of the symposium every year. We also want to thank, as Kiahna has done, our partners in this venture without whom it really would not have been possible at all. And that's the wonderful folks at Comcast, including Brett Perkins, Johnny Giles, Cherise Lilly, Jackie Puente, Antonia Williams, Ronald Lando, and Gretchen McElvain. All these folks work under the capable leadership of the man who has created a huge civic portfolio as well as a business one who believes in true racial equity and puts his name and resources behind that. Please welcome to the stage Comcast Executive Vice President David Cohen.
So thanks very much, Charlie. Good morning, everyone, and it's really a delight to see everyone here today. This annual conversation on race always provides new perspectives and new insights, and it's something I truly look forward to every year. That's a credit to Charlie and Kiahna and the whole team. It's a credit to Juan, who, as Charlie said, had the idea to have this program, and typical of Juan, when he has an idea and he pursues it, he doesn't just disappear. He's been an active part of this every year for all 6 years, and Juan, I really appreciate your engagement and what you've done to help bring this conversation to life every year. And at Comcast, we're very proud to have partnered with Aspen since the first symposium in 2011. So at that time, America's first African-American president was gearing up for what turned out to be a historic re-election victory. Now, as President Obama moves through his final year in office, we're slogging through a brutal and bizarre primary season, and I use that word intentionally, where there have been too many. I think one of the more uncomfortable aspects of the campaign has been that there have been far too many reminders about the role of race in American politics and in American society, sometimes not with the most intelligent discourse around them. Of course, this long campaign season has already produced one major winner, the polling industry. Never have so many people been polled so many times with so few enlightening results. But there are two enlightening polls that stick in my mind. Of course, neither of them has very much connection to the presidential campaign. I'm thinking of two CBS New York Times polls on race relations in America. One taken last summer and the other early in 2009, just after President Obama took office. The 2009 poll reflects the optimism many of us felt at the time. It reported that 2/3 of Americans believed that race relations were generally good. But that message was turned inside out in July of last year, when 6 in 10 Americans, according to the same poll, including heavy majorities of both blacks and whites, felt race relations were generally bad, and almost 40% felt the situation was getting worse and not better. I think most of you would agree with me that this surge of pessimism was fed by the number of racial incidents that I talked about last year in my comments at this symposium, reminding us that America has still not stamped out the chronic disease of racism. Its symptoms can be subtle or tragically fatal, and we've learned that people and institutions can be infected without even realizing it. We don't have a cure yet, but we've come a long way, including through programs like this one, putting a spotlight on these issues in a fearless way and in a safe environment. I believe that the more critical attention we focus on the different aspects of race in America, the better equipped we'll be to eradicate this disease completely. So Charlie has, as usual, put together a rich and a full agenda, which is going to get underway as soon as I get off this stage, so I'm going to rush to do that. And we start with Richard Louie providing us with an overview on the racially connected events and issues that have gained traction during this election cycle. I know Richard will give us some new perspective, and Richard, your presentations have become a highlight of this symposium, and I'm not just saying that because Richard is a valuable member of the NBC News and MSNBC family and a friend, but because he has spent real time in the trenches on all these issues and speaks with an almost unique sense of perspective around the state of race in American politics. So we're also looking forward to the first panel discussion, which is on the timely theme of race and the university. And as chair of the trustees of the University of Pennsylvania, this is a topic that's of personal interest to me, because it's interesting that while American colleges and universities have made gains in general in enrolling more minority students, but incidents on different campuses have shown us that gains in diversity on campus have not necessarily been matched by gains in inclusion on campus, as black students especially have made clear that they often feel unwelcome and even actively discriminated against. Their complaints support an observation by Sean Harper, who is an education professor at Penn and director of the Center for the Study of Race and Equity in Education. Professor Harper said, and I quote, "Simply having more students of color on a college campus does not ensure that they are going to feel included and respected. That's a challenge for higher education, and I'd suspect it's a challenge for companies in America and for society as a whole. Our second panel is going to take up the important issue of shifting urban demographics. The continuing revival of America's cities is one of the great success stories of the past 30 years. But now we've reached a chapter where we have to decide whether this urban renaissance will be inclusive with its benefits touching all people in all neighborhoods. And I think that's the important topic of discussion for our second panel today. I do know that everyone here today is committed to doing whatever you can to correct the inequalities that still compromise race relations in America and feed the virus of racism. And I think in an innovation, we want everyone's participation in this dialogue today. So for the first time, we've scheduled the town hall session for open discussion, which is going to be hosted by Juan Williams. And I warn everyone here, Juan is a host, but also an instigator. So if you're in the room, you're likely to be called on. And I think that's the goal, to really create a dialogue, and there's no one better at doing that than Juan Williams. So your participation today can help bring solutions to the problem that has for so long stood in between this great country of ours and its ability to realize its full potential. So I want to thank you for being here today and hope that you enjoy the symposium. And again, thanks to Charlie and Kiahna for the leadership and the hard work to put together such a great program. Thanks.
Okay, let's get started. Our opening presentation will be from Richard Louie, who, as David has mentioned, and we all know, is an American journalist and news anchor for MSNBC and NBC News. He, before this, was the anchor 5 years at CNN Worldwide. In 2007, he became the first Asian American male to anchor a daily cable news show. He has spanned 25 years of community leadership and appearances at community events. He has worked with the UN Foundation, the State Department, various universities. He's an ambassador for Plan International, the Epilepsy Foundation. He has worked on the boards of NGOs, including on homeless housing and human trafficking. He's an active columnist in many publications that you read, including both local newspapers and national papers such as USA Today and Politico. Richard received his bachelor's from Berkeley and his MBA from the University of Michigan, and we've invited him to lead us off today with a presentation on the year in race and looking particularly at this election cycle and some other issues that will lead into our panel. So please welcome Richard Louie.
Good morning to all of you. And thank you so much, Charlie Firestone, Kiahna Cassell, as well as David Cohen, who, as always, put together a fantastic event here. And thank you to my good friend, Juan Williams, from that network whose ratings are always halved by the competition. Or did I get that backwards? That was my not-so-inside TV joke, wasn't it, Juan? Juan, thank you as always. I learn so much watching you every day as you do the great work that you do. It is an honor, of course, to be back at this important discussion that we're about to have this year and the past 5 years as well. Thank you again, all four. The state of race in this year is pretty hard to describe than it was last year. And when we look at the headlines leading up to 2015, they overflowed with themes of the state of race, right, as has been said by David and Charlie so far. And when we all sat together last year, I remarked on some of the stories that unfortunately I had to report on. The names, Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner, Freddie Gray and Michael Brown, just some of them. I started last year with the cities as well, Sanford, New York, Baltimore, and Ferguson. And one moment stood out for me from that year, even today, as I reflected on how we would share today's hours together. Our President of the United States, 2 years after his re-election, in 2014, having to stand in front of the cameras, Americans watching his picture on the right side of their screen, their television, right in front of them. On screen left, cars and communities on fire. You remember that. He pleaded for calm that evening hour. Here was the first African-American president watching African-American communities that looked like 1964 in 2014. It was a flashback of unfortunate irony. Everybody wanted only to be just a flashback. And so this year, I'd like to start with what journalists are asked to do often, and that is to give a little bit of context, and it is difficult given the limited experience that I have had. That context asks if this election will remember those difficult times, those recent 2 years of race relations that we were just seeing on the screen, while simultaneously those years being a period of the most historic advances in race. Context tells us we must look forward and look back together. So looking back is where I'll start. The completion of 2 administrations of the country's first minority president, record voter turnout and representations of minorities that we have seen so far, not only in places of politics, but also courts, in business, and in communities. The gaps on college campuses, almost 70% of presidents saying race relations are the same or better than 5 years ago. But students disagree with that. 58% say they have witnessed an act of discrimination. The numbers, according to 538, get worse on campuses with less diversity. So also looking back, the economic numbers, well, they're good by some counts. The stock market stretching towards 18,000, unemployment in some states at 20 or 40-year lows, minimum wages growing in some states, housing prices growing even more yet. But if the average American is in the middle class, their economic power, says Pew here, has shrunk by a fifth nationally, going down by over 20%. 500,000 Americans don't have a home last night. They did not. And at any time, 50,000 veterans are homeless, 1.4 million of them at risk of being homeless at any time. The majority of all of these, minorities. Then there's that quintessential American question, right? Who wants to be a millionaire? Well, if you're white or Asian American, PI, the odds that you'll become a millionaire, 1 in 5. That's the highest. If you are Latino or African American, the odds, they're much tougher for you. 1 in 15, says Forbes. But numbers, of course, as all of us know in this room, don't, paint the entire picture. For Asian American PIs, for instance, they also represent the highest group of the hidden poor. In my home of New York, 1 in 4 live in poverty. They are the worst off, the exact opposite of the model minority. So we must look deeper. Looking back, there was also the industry that we were describing that I'm in, and that's news. The last year saw some amazing developments. The first African American and Asian American broadcast network anchor, NBC News' Lester Holt, sits at the chair never seen by a minority ever before on any network. MSNBC's Jose Diaz-Balart became the only Latino American male to anchor a daily national English cable network program this past year. Looking back, there is also the news itself. This was an unexpected year, as we all know and from recent headlines, of terror attacks, not only in the United States, but across the world. I was rushed to both Paris and San Bernardino in the last several months. In Paris, one of the storylines was that entire Muslim communities were no-go zones. On my 3rd day in Paris, I went to one of those no-go zones, one of those no-go places. Saint-Denis. It's an area about 40 minutes outside of downtown Paris. Amir drove me there. He was a taxi driver. He came to Paris 5 years before from Syria and lived in affordable Saint-Denis at the time. He had 3 children. Young father. He stayed in a simple condominium for 2 years. He learned French, but his English was not that good. And my French was also not that good. So during our ride, it was 3 hours long we spent together. We did something my parents could not do. We talked to each other using a translation app on our phones. Try it. He took me to the market area where he used to shop when he lived in Saint-Denis, where families shopped. We stopped at a version of a French Muslim McDonald's. I ordered 6 sandwiches, Amir helping me to choose with the translation app along the way. A fish sandwich, a halal burger or 2, and that's how it went. We then walked across the street to grab a coffee at a place that he used to have coffees at. Amir explained to the proprietor there, in Arabic, that I would like a coffee. The owner's face was, as you can probably imagine, a bit quizzical. I imagine he was probably thinking something like, who is this Asian-looking person who spoke English, hanging out with a bearded Muslim friend, and why are they speaking with each other using their phones in French and English and not Arabic? And why did 2 people have a large bag with 6 sandwiches in it? And so that is how it went. Amir, the no-go zone was not overtly necessarily a no-go zone. It was like most large U.S. cities with nice, okay, and rough areas. The places where children played, the places where families went on weekends, and the places drugs were sold. That night, after being dropped off at my hotel, I had my 6 hamburgers. I began to unpeel those wrappers to try each and then share the ones I could not finish. Very American, obviously, with way too much food sitting in front of me. Then I got the word. They had captured the planner of the Paris terror attacks. Where? In Saint-Denis, where I was just hours before. And so the narrative continued that evening. There are no-go communities for Muslims, of Muslims, in Paris. But I asked, what about Amir? Just like the narrative of Muslims in America has persisted, as we have seen. It was thereafter San Bernardino when I spoke to some in that local community. The leader at the mosque who told me, yes, the killer had attended my mosque not too long ago, but what he did was not of Islam. Understandably, terror is something to fear. One result has been a push for all Muslims to be banned for a period of time coming to our country. 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide. 2 of my grandparents came to this country in 1909. They came here illegally. They bought the name Louis, actually, pretending to be children from a family that were real U.S. citizens. My grandparents' real last name was Wong. My real last name is Wong. Louis is an illegal name, to be honest. I'm a descendant of undocumented immigrants. Why? Well, there were 2 young teenagers skirting the law, the only law, when they were in love. That law was the first ever created in U.S. history that outlawed a certain nationality, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. It said in part this, quote, in the opinion of the government of the United States, the coming of Chinese laborers to this country endangers the good order of certain localities. Outlawing a certain religion might be seen to be of the same order or disorder. Americans today are now caretakers, I believe, of an important privilege. We have enjoyed one of the most expansive periods, as I have said, of our country's acceptance of diversity. But we have also seen one of the most expansive periods of the challenges to diversity. The last 2 years of Trayvon and Eric and Freddie and more have shown us how 2 extremes can exist in a dichotomous world, that they can exist simultaneously. There is the good state of race, and there is the bad state of race. The good state of race is more empowered than ever with advances in many places and corners that would surprise anybody 8 years ago, and certainly the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez. However, the bad state of race takes us back to the civil rights era of painful, anguishing conflicts. It hurts as Generation Xers, it hurts baby boomers and those of the golden generation to watch every time. Millennials and plurals today are tweens. This hurts them too because they strive and leap forward on equality, both ideologically and in action like no generation before. It is the new that will keep the hope and the energy of the good state of race alive for the old. So for today's symposium, I went to speak to the new, the voters who this day and this year want to pull the lever for the first time, that American privilege so many of our relatives have fought for. In Florida on Thursday, Lynette and Isael, who are in their 30s, registered to vote for the first time. The married couple telling me they talked in the car on the way over to the restaurant on Good Friday. And that there in front of them was the National Council of La Raza working to get out the vote. Larcel McKee registered after skipping elections for the last 8 years. He wanted fair wages for all. That's where API Vote was working to get out the vote and register him. Connie Marquez, the cook at Red Rock Casino in Las Vegas, she told me she promised her father she would always vote. He taught her it was her honor. She said she never broke a promise with her father, even those years after he passed away. Her children, grandchildren, she says, you must vote. There was Sharina Clevitt. Her parents brought her to America from Asia decades ago. She sat with me Wednesday in Nevada at the voter registration table. In her retirement career, she wants to do what her father taught her to do. Do not take anything from this country, he told her. It gave you home and opportunity. You must give instead to America. Notice all of these folks, they look back as they look forward, and their newness gives energy to the old. Their hopefulness on this state of race reflects how today fewer men and women are islands. Fewer do stand alone, more empowered than ever. This state of race must use its newfound advancement, not sit by the sidelines and enjoy the accomplishment, or it risks losing what it has recently gained. Today's state of race, I would say there is still much to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That'll be a great lead-in to our first panel, which will be moderated by Juan Williams, political analyst for Fox News, former columnist for The Washington Post, and a senior correspondent for NPR, the author of now 7 books, including The Eyes on the Prize and 3 bestsellers. He's interviewed the last 5 presidents and Supreme Court justices, leading political and business figures. Next week, they will be releasing his newest book, We the People, which is a modern-day look at modern-day figures who are affirming the vision of the Founding Fathers. So be on the lookout for We the People by Juan Williams. And please welcome Juan and the rest of the panel, who he will introduce. Oh, need to mic him up. Oh, there he is.
Thank you. So please ask the panelists to join me. This is Nailah Harper-Malveaux from Yale University. To my far left is Phoebe Haddon, who's the Chancellor at Rutgers-Camden. This is DeRay McKesson. DeRay, of course, is one of the, I'm sorry? DeRay McKesson. Clearly, now running for mayor of Baltimore, I believe. Is that right? Congratulations. And Eduardo Padrón, he is the president of Miami-Dade Community College. Well, welcome. We are here to take a look at how young people on college campuses are responding to so many of the themes we heard raised earlier by David Cohen and by Richard Louis, in terms of how race, demographics are changing in our society today. I wanted to begin by asking Chancellor Haddon of Rutgers-Camden, who is, by the way, a scholar of implicit bias and race in the society, how she sees her role as a chancellor in dealing with race and the changing face of race on American college campuses.
Thank you, Juan. Let me say that I have spent the last 3 weeks in a sort of surreal journey to come to talk about this issue. 3 weeks ago, I was in South Africa, and I was traveling with our students, and we arrived in Cape Town University and spoke to students. The dean of the law school at Cape Town is an Indian woman who actually was dean at Albany before going to become dean at Cape Town. Wonderful story. But we talked about student unrest. And there, if you don't know, there is great unrest about inequality. It is about income inequality. It's about race. It's about too little too soon, too little and too long. And it is in the context of revolution that has created disappointments. I then went on to come back here and join Campus Compact in a conversation about how universities here are dealing with issues of race and poverty in their own institutions and in their cities. We talked about race. We talked about too little, too long. We talked about the same issues and about the sense of disappointment and where we were. But those university presidents were also talking about civic engagement and anchor institutions as a way of dealing with these issues, contextualizing highly impact-focused work that engages students. I then came back to my campus, and we are planning a 60s retrospective that's going on next Tuesday. And that will focus on Rutgers-Camden as it was in the 60s. It will also be a context for talking about too little, too long, student unrest, both in the 60s as well as today, and how we focus on it. So it seems to me that higher education has an opportunity to talk about these issues in many different ways, and it is critically important, I think, for universities to have the fora for talking about these things. The problem is when there is not that opportunity to have frank and honest conversation that is mediated, facilitated, and where students have trust in each other as they talk about them.
Chancellor Haddon, thank you. I wanted now to turn to President Padrón and ask you, as the president of a college campus, to tell us a little bit about how you deal with the changing demographics and the tensions it creates on a college campus.
Well, I feel very strongly that colleges and universities have not only are the best hope, but the best opportunity to change the whole situation with race in America. But before we're able to do that, I think universities really need to move into the 21st century. I think universities have the best opportunity to be incubators of inclusion, to become the dream factories that allowed people to reach the American dream. I cannot think of a better equalizer in society today than colleges and universities if they do the right thing. If you think back to the 20th century, when most Americans could go into factories and offices and make a good wage and become part of the middle class, frankly, universities, in all the elitism that they represent, all the exclusivity and selectivity, it was not a big issue because most Americans could achieve the American dream by working hard. Today, that's not possible. The American dream today requires that people in the 21st century knowledge economy acquire the knowledge and the skills to be able to succeed in American society today. So going to college today and being able to be part of the inclusion process is a must if we as a nation want to be able to prosper and maintain the leadership position in the world. So that's what really has changed, and that's why it makes the work that we do as colleges and universities so very important. The fact of the matter is that our universities and colleges today, with many well-meaning people, the effort to include minorities, if you look since the 1980s, for example, the number of blacks and Hispanics has more than doubled in colleges and universities. But let's not be confused. Diversity is one thing, inclusion is something else. And the fact of the matter is that institutions today need to find a way to really give a sense of belonging to all the students who come to the university, provide the vehicles for them to really be participatory. And many of the issues that we see today, many of the problems, many of the wrongs that we see in the incidents at various universities are only symptoms of a bigger problem. And the only way we're going to solve that is by really creating a culture of inclusion that is pervasive, that is by design. And I'm not naive to think that you do that overnight. That is a process that takes time, but you have to start somewhere. And that means to me that diversity should be at the center of decision-making, inclusion and diversity at the center of decision-making and at the center of everything that is important at the university, and not something on the side. You see, I see universities, the first thing they do is rush to appoint a diversity officer. Well, I believe the presidency of the university need to be diversity officers in chief. And once the president assumes that role and makes sure that all the students have an equal opportunity, because universities are not different than the general society. We know that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And universities and colleges should be the centers where opportunity is the domain of everyone. So while I'm very hopeful that things can be much better, we still have a long way to go.
Thank you, President Padrón. It's very interesting to me. Again, we hear this theme. It's been brought up now by David Cohen, Richard Louis, that we see increased admission, increased demographic diversity on campuses, not necessarily increased inclusion.
Let me just ask you something.
No, hang on. Let's just finish up this part of our panel. So, Nailah Harper-Malveaux, you're at... Nailah. Yeah. I'm terrible with first names. Nailah, you're at Yale, obviously an elite educational institution. When we think about diversity in terms of numbers, I think just as we've heard from President Padrón, there's increased diversity at a Yale. Mm-hmm. The question is about increased inclusion and reflection of the broader issues that we're going to hear about in a moment from DeRay that are impacting America nationally. Mm-hmm. How are you at Yale dealing with the changes? What are students feeling in terms of inclusion and in terms of the broader issues in the society?
Sure, yeah, well, I think both Richard Louis and David Cohen make great points about kind of the tension between these two seemingly polar opposite narratives of racial progress, and then on the other hand, racial violence and a continued brutality. And I think as students, especially students of color, we're also dealing with that tension, and we find ourselves kind of in the middle as both products of racial progress. You know, I would not be able to go to a school like Yale if we were, 50 so years ago. But also seeing people that both look like us and look like our families and we share a kinship with, just kind of being indiscriminately brutalized before our very eyes sometimes. And so I think that it's that sort of tension that a lot of these student activists and student protests are sprouting up. And I think it's also just holding a university that we love accountable for kind of the values that it espouses in its mission statements, in its brochures, in kind of why we came to Yale, right? We came to Yale for opportunity, but also because we thought that there would be this inclusion. We thought that there would be a prioritization of students of color and of faculty of color. And so we're actually trying to just hold a school that we love accountable for kind of the things that they say that they're going to do.
You said brutalized. You mean?
I mean through social media, on video, as Mr. Louis pointed out.
You're talking about students, or you're talking about people in the broader society?
Broader society, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just talking about these two kind of narratives that we're in some way straddling between. But there is also sometimes where these incidences kind of do, in some ways, carry on over to college campuses. So recently, I think about a year ago, at Yale, a student, a friend of mine, a senior, Taj, was actually held at gunpoint by a New Haven police officer because he matched the description of someone who was stealing from Yale campus, right? And so it's moments like those where you see kind of the crossover and the lines are a little bit more blurred. And then the incidences that happened in November, I think, also show more of a complete picture of what racism on college campuses look like today.
All right, well, we want to come back because there's a lot in there, but I wanted to turn to DeRay and ask you, as someone who is so in touch with the pulse of protest in America, and here we've heard again from Richard and from David and others about Ferguson, what happened in New York, Staten Island, what happened, obviously, everybody knows down in Florida with Trayvon Martin, and the increased presence of public protest. How do you view college campuses and how they're responding to the pulse of protest on the greater American society?
Yeah, so I think about, I've been to many cities across the country, hundreds of protests in many colleges as well. When I think about protests, I'm sensitive to understanding that it is about truth-telling in public. Like, telling the truth in public is so much of what protest has been. We stood in streets to use our bodies to tell the truth. We disrupted meetings to force people to tell the truth. And understanding that protest in and of itself is not the answer, that protest creates space for the answer, right? When I think about the college campuses, there is, as we've talked about, the difference between diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity is about bodies. Inclusion is about culture. Like, what does it feel like on campus? And what we've seen at Yale and so many other colleges is people saying, like, something here doesn't feel right. Like, this doesn't feel like a place that honors my blackness or honors my experience or allows me to be my best self. And I think that's really important. I'm also sensitive to understanding that institutions are designed to outlast people, right? Like, they know that you're going to graduate at some point and, they're going to outlast you. And that is a particular challenge that the college protesters have. In addition to the fame bug, right? So there's something about, and I've been to so many colleges where all of a sudden the world looks at them and then protest changes, right? Like, it becomes the media just changes the way people tell their stories, which is, it's hard because on one hand, like, people need the stories to be amplified, but on the other hand, like, when I've seen The View come and interview people or BT come and all of a sudden the spirit of protest and the unrest all changes, especially on college campuses, which is interesting. I'm also mindful of I think about places like Yale, right? I was at Yale and there's a group of students who are marginalized within Yale economically, right? And they are organizing differently. And like, that's really important too, that the inclusion, people on the Upper West Side get to talk about what their culture feels like, and nobody's complaining about that. But when kids at Yale do it, people write and think pieces about how they're so privileged and how dare they talk about what culture feels like. And that's important that we tease it out, that people have a right to feel safe and valued in their communities, wherever their communities are. And that's important. I think about protest is, I'm interested to see how and if the college protests can sustain over time, given that the institutions are designed to outlet. Like, what college presidents do is that they do a town hall and get everybody into a room and get somebody with a PhD in something to tell you that race is, that progress is coming. Like, that is sort of what happens. It's like the churn of the college activism, the response to college activism. And what we've seen is people sort of push against that, right? They continue to push, impress, and it seems so simple, right? You change master from Yale and Harvard, or you do those things that seem like cosmetic changes, but the students are saying, like, this is a part of the culture, right? That this is what it means to be an inclusive campus. That you can recruit more trans students and have no gender-neutral bathrooms, and that is diversity with no inclusion, right? And I think that what we've seen is protest forces these conversations into the public space in ways that people can't ignore. The last thing I'll offer, because I know this was a big deal at one point, is when the protesters called for professors to be disciplined. And there is something about, I think about Twitter and the classroom as the last two radical spaces in America. And I think about the classroom as this place, both of them are places where the idea still matters, right? Like, the way people think about ideas is still what the currency is, and I think that's really powerful. And I love Twitter. Twitter's great. In the classroom, though, there is something about what happens when professors provide an academic veneer for racism. like an academic cover for bigotry. And I think we've seen that happen in some places. So I think about the costume incident is that some people...
Wait, you got to tell us.
What school was it at?
Yeah.
Was it at Yale?
Yeah.
The protesters called for the professor to be disciplined.
No, what happened?
Oh, she can probably explain the incident better than me.
Sure, yeah. So around Halloween, this is one of the incidences that kind of sparked a lot of protests at Yale. The IAC, which is the Intercultural Affairs Committee, a group of the administration, sent out an email basically saying, please be wary to students, just basically educating people about to try not to wear offensive costumes on Halloween. So things like blackface, turbans, headdresses, and then an associate master of a college sent an email in response to that, saying that students, if they had a problem with costumes, should either look away or start a conversation. She, in some ways, linked Yale students to, or paralleled Yale students to 5-year-olds playing dress up, and that people should have the right to wear offensive garb or be even transgressive.
Okay, hold on. So we know what the incident's about. Finish your thought.
Yeah, and it's just, and people use that to talk about free speech, right? And some people felt like that was an academic veneer for racism, that it was somebody in an academic setting saying that people can be offensive because we're going to learn from it, right? Without acknowledging that is an unsafe environment for some people, right? And I think that what I worry about is in the public conversation that did not come up. It was like the Yale students don't believe in free speech, and it was like, well, if I walk down the street saying "Hail Hitler" everywhere, that people will respond to that in a way that there will be a response to that, and people will say that is not. Nobody will be like, DeRay, that was free speech at Bowdoin. That's not it. That has to enter the public space. And there are some colleges that have been really proactive after the protest because they just didn't want the protest to come to them. But what does it mean when there's an endowment or something from somebody who's a slave owner? Like, will you just give the money back without protest, right? Because people don't want to protest. I don't ever want to protest again. We shouldn't have to protest. Protest is when people feel like they have no other option. So again, it's like the only way to force the truth into the public sphere.
All right, so hang on a second. So let me just say, so what we're dealing with here is the culture on the campus, as well as inclusion in terms of the opportunity to be on that campus for educational reasons. So when we are talking about something like this, there is an emphasis from, I think, what I'll call the establishment in American life, that inclusion is the priority, that having more people of color, more women, more not only racial, but also ethnic and religious diversity on campus is a triumph in this era, given where we have been in American society. What we're seeing, though, from the students is this emphasis on inclusion once they are there, that they insist that they have a sense of belonging and agency to change what's going on. You spoke about the campus as one of the places, the safe places for change in American society. You said Twitter was the other, we'll come back. But college classrooms as a safe environment for that change. But the broader establishment's response often is, you have a seat at the table. You're at Yale University. What are you complaining about? And we come back to this notion that it's freedom of speech. If you want to have competing ideas, if you want to say that some are racist, misogynistic, hostile, then you have to be, like DeRay, able to articulate your position and feel free to do so without calling somebody a racist. Chancellor, can you do that?
So let me say that inclusion has to be understood in the context of whether or not an institution has an equity approach to their community. And if there is not equity, if there is not a sense that you are entitled like everybody else, and that there is no sense of privilege that is predominating an approach, then you have equity. And if you have equity, then you can have those kinds of conversations.
Well, hold on a second. What's equity on a college campus. Everybody's a student, so everybody, I mean, there's equity in terms of you are at the table at Rutgers.
That's not enough.
Okay? But that's what the society that's competing to get into your school thinks. Boy, that student got into Camden, right? Okay. And it has the opportunity, as we've heard from others today, to take a step up in terms of economic opportunity, what you called, I think President Padrón called it, a knowledge-based society as opposed to a strong back society, to get into the middle class.
Right. When I talk about equity, I'm talking about a sense that everyone has the right and the tools to be able to come to the table and have a discussion. So I'm not simply talking about whether you're there, but whether you have the resources available, whether there is a student-centered approach to education that is welcoming, and whether you then have the ability to move out of that student environment and into the real world. And there are educational institutions now, like yours and mine, where we focus on that equity, the notion that people must have the means to be able to thrive on that campus, not just to be there.
Now, what does thrive mean? Does thrive mean to succeed academically, or does it mean to feel comfortable culturally?
Both. Both. It has to be both, because you can't thrive academically if you're feeling under siege. You can't thrive if you don't have the support of faculty and staff and other students who view you as part of a community. And it's up to the teachers and the faculty and the staff to provide that welcoming community. But also it starts with having enough resources so people can thrive. And so Pell
And that sense of equity also has to come with, the university. And I define the university by the people who labor there, the students as well as the faculty and the staff. Has to be a reflection of the community and society.
Yes.
And we often talk about diversity and so forth and so on. We're talking about the students and the progress we have made in bringing more people of color. But the people who labor at the university have to be equally reflective of the society and the community that we serve. And that's where we have the real issue. Because most students of color today in colleges and universities do not see reflected in the people who are in the leadership positions. They do not see, they cannot aspire to sometime be like that president or that dean or that professor, because they don't see them in the staff. And as long as we continue the model that have prevailed in America, and to be honest, all over the world, in terms of universities being centers of exclusion, totally ranked on the basis of exclusivity and many other factors, that selectivity, what's happening is that it's very difficult for people of color, ethnic groups, religious groups, to really have the kind of participation in these institutions that, as I said before, are key to our well-being in the 21st century. We can no longer afford not to have this institution being beacons of participation and everything else that will equip citizens to really be successful in society today. This is not the 20th century anymore. So we need to find ways of defining the situation and creating the environments that will allow the students to flourish and to be able to succeed.
And
Well,
that
let me
means
interrupt
graduate.
you.
That means graduate.
Graduate. So this is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, because I think what you're describing is giving people, especially people from disadvantaged communities, opportunity to have a first-rate education.
That's
and then
right.
you spoke about using that to go out into the broader
That's
society. But is that the emphasis, or is it more this cultural issue that we've touched on, this sense of inclusion on the campus?
You cannot have one
Can't
without the
separate.
other. Success to me is defined of students who come, feel at home, have a sense of belonging, and are able to graduate, accomplish their goals that they came to the university for. Just being accepted into the university and then dropping out after 6 months or a year, or not being able to complete, that doesn't do it. That's what I'm saying. Yes, you have the diversity, that's wonderful. You need to have the inclusion necessary and the support systems.
That's right.
2 words, support systems.
For
these
academic
students.
attainment or for cultural comfort?
Both.
For both.
Both.
both. You cannot detach one from the other. And that is key. And I have seen it, and it's possible. It's not something that is impossible to accomplish, but it takes a complete change of mind. It takes creating a culture that is totally different from that culture that prevails on many campuses throughout America today.
Student-centered.
DeRay, when you hear this conversation, do you think it's kind of pretentious, given the harsh realities that we see lead to protest in the larger society?
No, I think they're right. I mean, people, I'm mindful that people don't want to protest, right? That people do it because they feel, I think to Mizzou. They asked, right? They sent the demands, they had the meetings, they did all that stuff, and it didn't work, right? And then it was a hunger strike in the football team, and everybody was like, there's a problem, right? So people did it the other way. And I'm also sensitive that what happens to, black kids or kids in marginalized communities is that they spend so much time fighting the institution that they don't actually get the skills, right?
They don't get
They're
what?
the skills, right?
Oh,
They're fighting
education.
Right, they're fighting the culture piece so much, which is real because that's about their lived reality, that there is not as much time to focus on the skills for some people, and that is traumatic in its own right. So,
And a shame.
yeah, we have to figure that out too. That has to be a part of the work. But people, people don't want to fight. I did not want to stand in the middle of the street. They were tear gassing people, and I was there, right? Because that was the right thing to do at the right time. And I think about the Mizzou students, a great example is that they asked. They sent the demands, they asked for the meetings, they went to the meetings, and nobody responded until people did something else.
Well, when people are protesting on the streets, when you have a situation, Ferguson, how does it translate to University of Missouri?
Well, I think what it did is it showed people that they had power too, right? So many of those Mizzou students were in Ferguson during the unrest at the beginning and saw that they could actually stand in the street, and that was like a real thing that they could do. And I do think that for so many people, it was I'm mindful that we aren't born woke. Something wakes us up. And for so many people, that woke people up. They were like, I can use my body differently. I can use my power and my voice. And so much, think about people of color, we always face these issues of erasure. And erasure manifests often in two ways. One is that either our story is never told or it's told by everybody but us. And in these moments, we became our own storytellers, right? And the way people told their stories was not only on social media, but with their bodies. It was the hunger strike at Mizzou, right? It was again, this truth-telling in public that is so central to so much of this work. But I agree with Phoebe and Eduardo about, thank you, that was good, about the importance of equity. And also making sure that there's a real sense of inclusion and student-centered. But there is something about how can colleges get in front of this? Students are not the only people that know their problems on the campuses, right? So it seems like in the same way that we get frustrated with elected officials and police, it's there are people in administrations who watch these things fester and don't do anything until somebody's shutting down the dining hall, and then everybody's trying to have 15 meetings about it, right? So what's the role for university leaders to get in front of this stuff so that people don't have to protest?
All right, so what is the role for student leaders
Sure.
as they try to deliver on this emphasis on inclusion in addition to academic attainment and success?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what DeRay said was really important about knowing what you're fighting for even before things get out of hand. And I think you see this at Yale, you saw this at Claremont McKenna, and many other places, that students know what's wrong and have
What's
asked...
wrong where?
In the institution, right?
In the institution.
Right? So students know that we need more diverse faculty, and they need not only to be hired, but also retained, and resources need to be put forth to cultural centers and those faculty members and departments that focus on these issues, right? And so students know that there's a culture that needs to change and have been telling administration about it. But I think it takes sometimes these incidences to actually realize what DeRay said, realize your voice, right? Realize that there is an example here that we can actually use to say, here's a concrete thing that needs to change, and here's a way forward for the universities. And so the demands that we put forth at Yale were a way forward. And the good thing about how the administration handled that afterward was that they did respect those demands in a lot of ways, and made an effort definitely to try to address some of them.
Well, let me come back to a real concrete example that you brought up, DeRay brought up, which was the Halloween costumes on campus.
Yeah.
In the business I work in, American media,
Right.
oftentimes this is viewed as, boy, these Yale students are some kind of sensitive.
Right.
And they have terms like microaggression. And if somebody is walking down, Pennsylvania Avenue and they saw kids dressed up like pimps and hoes, they wouldn't say, oh, gee, how outrageous, how deeply offensive. I can't go back to the class today because my heart is hurt. They would say either these people are ass blanks or I get the joke or whatever, but they would move on.
Yeah, and that's an understandable, I think, point of view, and something that lots of pundits have definitely made fun of.
Right.
But I think what it's hiding is like a bigger issue, right? And so what's the issue here is that an administrator, right, is basically speaking for majority white students, saying it is okay for you to wear offensive costumes. It is okay for you to engage in racial recklessness at the expense of the safety of black students and
Wait,
Native
what safety?
students.
Were they attacking people?
No, just I mean safety in the terms of bodies and
Well, no, you say bodies. So if I see these frat boys dressed up like pimps and hoes, right? And I think they are jerks. It's offensive to me. How does that, you say, impact your body?
Well, I think it impacts our bodies as a whole because of, as you said, there are microaggressions, but stereotyping, right, is a huge thing that we have to deal with. And stereotyping then leads to undervaluing, leads to dehumanization. It leads to police officers feeling like it is okay for people to shoot people because they're automatically seen as dangerous. And so I think that it's all a part of one system in which these little offenses can turn into bigger problems and can really kind of envelop the mindset of Americans and have already enveloped the mindset of Americans.
DeRay, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I'll just remind you that you can be marginalized within a privileged setting. Right?
That's what we're talking about with a college campus.
Yeah, or what you're talking about with Yale, that people can be marginalized in spaces of ostensible privilege. Like people, if nobody picks up trash on the Upper West Side, they are calling somebody, right? That they still have the right to say something. That people can be marginalized in settings of privilege. So you think about Yale, where people, yes, it is a privileged setting overall, that they are in a different part of the American society that still has racism, that still has homophobia, right? That they exist there, and they have the right to say something about that the college should feel different, and that's the culture and inclusion piece.
Chancellor?
Yeah, I can say that my daughter was actually at law school right during this time, and she wrote hours and hours about microaggression, about implicit bias. Her classmates were condescending. They did not value the construct that she was utilizing, in part because they've never experienced this kind of downgrading. And really what happened was that there was no meeting of the minds, no ways of mediating this discussion until Yale president interceded in a way that really compromised their learning opportunity for that entire semester. And we can talk about, shape up and ship out and be prepared, but if you are in supposedly a community where you can thrive and you find that you don't have the support system that enables you to do that, that really does compromise the ability to learn.
A part of why that happens is because colleges and universities, some of them, have allowed siloed existences.
That's right.
Where you may be at Yale, but you are not talking to this group of students or that group of students. Your whole life is consumed with your own group because universities allow that to happen. And that's what I said at the beginning. You need to have inclusion by design. And part of what needs to happen is to create the environment that doesn't allow those things to happen. The reason for going to the university is a socialization process that allows the students to really learn from each other and be able to overcome this lack of sensitivities and lack of understanding of other people. But if you go to university and you sleep in the dorms where only Hispanic students sleep and you only have these groups and it's a groupie thing, you're not going to get maximum benefit from that experience.
Let me say that most of the students at Yale have not had the experience of living with other people before. And so the construct that they make about socialization is very, very damaged by a whole lifetime of not having the chance to interact. And partly that's because we all live such segregated lives throughout the time that we grow up, where we go to church, our communities. And so really how we build these new communities, and I am in full agreement, how we build them in a way that really replicates a community is going to be critical for the 21st century, because we can't survive this way. One of the important things that I think we have to think about is whether we can, in fact, not have a student-centered, civically engaged community of learners. Because if we don't have that, we won't have success in terms of graduation for students, because they will drop out and not be engaged. We won't have the ability to build the cities that we are a part of as part of public institutions particularly, but private as well, like New Haven and Yale. And we won't be able to actually teach our kids the values of a multicultural society.
Well, let me ask then. I've been reading about controversies on campus with regard to, like, segregated housing, minority students requesting a black dorm, Hispanic dorm. You were talking about the importance of people getting to know each other. You're talking about the importance of people living together to achieve these discussions that DeRay's been talking about, the effort toward inclusion. How do you feel about these separate dorms, separate dining halls? How do you feel about this? Is this good? Is this part of the process?
Not good at all. I don't think this helps to be able to accomplish what we know is so important. And if we don't accomplish that in colleges and universities, where the young people come and are our best hope for the future, we're never going to accomplish it anywhere else. Because this is the greatest opportunity we have in America today, as we bring people all kinds to colleges and universities, to have them have the appropriate experience for them to be able to finish and go out into society and be leaders and be people that are agents of change.
So in other words, prepare them to go into a multiracial, multi-ethnic society and to succeed.
Right.
That's the goal. You had something to say.
Yeah, I understand, and I think that that's very true. I do think we should talk about why students want these spaces, though, because they live in an environment where it's majority white, and all their classes are majority white. And so I think sometimes we would like to retreat into a space where we feel more comfortable, where we can find other people that share some of the values and experiences, and where we can commune together. And I think so that's kind of the reason why we're searching for these places. And I think what we should also think about is in terms of responsibility. Whose responsibility is it? Is it always on students of color to be the reachers out, to be the people that hold out the olive branch? Or is it also on white students and administrators to have stakes in this issue?
Well, you two disagree, because I think that President Padrón, you're right here. I mean, you can speak for yourself, but I think your emphasis on preparing young people to go out, and you understand that you're coming into a white majority elite setting, especially at Yale.
And we do practice how to be with a majority white all the time. That's the thing, is we do it all the time.
Right.
And
I don't think it's either or.
Right.
We can provide opportunities for people to interact, and we can give them safe spaces to be a part.
This was an either or choice here between.
I don't think so.
Are you in favor of these all black, all Hispanic dorms, dining halls, et cetera, or not?
I am not answering the question. Because a president or a chancellor has to act responsibly for the good of their institution, and it's not either or.
Well,
That's
I think
the
it's
dynamic of
if
higher
I show up
education.
as a student and I'm protesting, I say, I want a safe space, picking up on your point, because I don't feel comfortable, and I want a safe space and a more supportive space, and this is my black dorm. What do you say? You don't get a chance to be either or. You got to.
Yes, I do. I'm the chancellor.
Oh, okay. All right.
I will add
I
too,
can do that.
Go ahead.
about the athletes. I think about so many universities where I've been to schools where the athletes are like, I've never been to the student center before, because we live on this distant part of campus and we do everything in our own corner.
Right.
And they have said, like, we want to be a part of student life too. Going back to this idea of inclusion by design, how do we make sure that that experience is real for so many people? And I've had conversations with football players, for instance, that at big universities who are like, I don't even pick my own classes. Like somebody picks my classes for me. Right? Like that is a wild experience when you think about setting students up to have the best possible academic experience and then post-college career as well.
Very interesting. All right. So we've come to the end of this phase of our discussion. We have about 15 minutes for question and answer. We have 2 microphones set up. We'd ask you to come and identify yourself and then ask a question. Do not make a speech. I definitely am equipped to be the bad cop given what I do for a living. Please go right ahead.
I'm Unique Redwood, President and CEO of the Consumer Health Foundation. I went to Georgia Tech in the 90s, and I remember about 6 months in thinking, all the janitors, all the bus drivers are black, and all my professors are white. And I left there thinking that that was just a replication of our society. So do you think, really, all 4 of you, that you can create this bubble of a university that allows everyone to thrive within a society that actually is not like that at all?
Well, let me interpret your question. Don't go away because we might come right back to you. But DeRay, you said something I think most people might hear a little bit more about when you said Twitter and classrooms are safe spaces for this kind of discussion. But now what we hear from the question is, well, wait a second, but there are all these external signals about the larger society and even how the larger society, this picks up on President Padrón's point, comes in and you see, oh, my professors and the top of the academic ladder, they're white people of a certain privilege and class. The bus drivers, the janitors, they're people of a different race and class. I'm not an idiot. I can see this, right? So is the classroom a safe space then, or is it a place where, you know what, you should be thinking, I'm trying to achieve something to break through barriers for my family, for my community, get the credentials, and leave here so that I can make a difference. Am I fair to your question? Okay.
Yeah, so what I said was Twitter and the classroom are the last 2 radical spaces in America, not safe spaces.
Okay.
But to your question, I think that, and I led human capital work in 2 public school districts in Baltimore City and Minneapolis, where that is replicated as well. The bus drivers, the janitors, the food service workers, people of color, everybody in we've replicated that. I think there is
We should say that we have some exceptions on the stage.
I think that there are some opportunities for higher ed institutions to think about skill development for people who traditionally are in those disadvantaged jobs, right? So is a university allowing janitors to access audit classes for free, right? Like, can they access those opportunities? And this is when we get to the conversation about reparations, right? And sort of moving away from the word which sets people off, but getting to the spirit of it, which is the idea of acknowledge and repair. And the acknowledgement is saying the disparity exists, right? And the repair is what is the institution's commitment to ending the disparity. And some of that has to be skill development. And then some of it has to be an intentional focus on hiring and development within the ranks, right? Like, will you have a postdoc program that exclusively recruits from HBCUs, right? Will you actually do that work? And that's the repair work. And some universities are hard to do the acknowledge work. I mean, that's where the protests come in, is that there are presidents who know this stuff is happening, they know there's, but they feel like they don't have the majority on the faculty council, So they aren't making the move. But the repair work is where I think the hardest stuff is. I think that most people actually do the acknowledge work on the campuses and stop there.
I have so much more to ask about this, but I think we should go on. Thank you for your question, please.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Watson, and thank you to all the panelists for an enlightening discussion. A question, and that is, in light of your discussion today, what are your thoughts, anybody, on the role of historically black universities and their significance today?
Today, so not in terms of protest and campus life, but just the role and the importance of historically black colleges and universities?
Yeah, I do. And I say that with a personal thing. I have a 20-year-old son who recently had an incident at a school in a school in Connecticut, and is now in Washington, D.C. And just having conversations with him, he's now at a historically black university. He's been very enlightening to me. And hearing your discussion, I just want to know what you all think.
So he feels safer now?
Absolutely. His conversation is exactly what you're saying. That he feels included, he feels at home, he feels like he can succeed. He felt that he had to try and fit in. A child who grew up extremely comfortable in Washington, D.C. and went to these great schools and lots of money spent and lots of money being spent in Connecticut. But definitely diversity, small amount of diversity no inclusion, and an incident had to happen for him to start to understand the world. I actually sad as a parent because I think he's lost his innocence. But it's been interesting. I think he feels validated.
Well, let me bring this question to you. You're overwhelmingly white campus, Yale University. Well, how would you think about a historically black college, and would you see that as then a contrasting safe space for a young academic? Is that fair?
Especially a black male.
Sure. Well, I think that historically black colleges have provided an amazing role and still provide an amazing role for black students because in a lot of ways we, on a majority white campus, we are consistently trying to navigate those waters and in some ways trying to mold ourselves into what we are expected to be on majority white campuses. And often, I think many of us feel either tokenized or stereotyped, and so I can understand definitely the role that historically black colleges still play in making many people feel like they are at home and like they can succeed and actually see, as President Padrón said, see people in professorships and in positions of power that they can aspire to. And I think that creates...
Let's let President Padrón jump in.
You know, there is no question that historically black institutions have played and continue to play a very important role, precisely because many students, in order to feel welcome, in order to feel included, they have to go to those institutions. What's wrong in America today is that no American should have to be confined to a specific type of institutions because they are not able to succeed, to feel safe, to feel welcome at other institutions that have the same obligation to make students feel positive about themselves and positive about the opportunities that they have to grow and succeed at those institutions. That's what is wrong.
Well, let me just come back to this on one final point on this question, which is, but then you have to go out into the broader world. So you could come from Washington, D.C., which until recently was majority black and had lots of black leadership on display and the like, but then you're going to have to go maybe work in, I don't know, Miami or Philly or someplace, and you say, well, wait a second, now I feel not so secure and therefore I have a reason not to achieve?
But that's not what happens. Actually, the data supports that people from historically black institutions or institutions that are providing safe spaces thrive there and then go on to thrive in their careers and in their work lives. So I'm for maximizing choice. There are lots of opportunities for us to create institutions where people can decide where to go or go to several places, hopefully graduate within 6 years or so.
What's your experience with historically black colleges and universities in terms of protest movement?
Yeah, so I went to Bowdoin, which is not historically black at all.
Historically white? Oh, yeah.
But I've been to a lot of HBCUs, and what I would say is that there is something about what happens when you have to fight every day, right? And there are some college campuses where you are like fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, and that like doesn't necessarily set you up to learn in the best way. And you know, my sister went to A&T, and when I think about our experiences, they were so different. Is that she didn't have to fight for so many things around visibility or to be seen or to be valued as somebody who had a mind, and she got to participate in culture differently, and like that was really powerful. And I saw that as her brother. So I agree with Phoebe about choice. That like, you know, different campuses serve different needs, and that's really important. So like making sure that there are campuses that serve all the needs are really powerful, but there is something about the exhaustion of fighting. And I think about that with protests. I think about that with a lot of colleges is that, you know, I think about white students in most places get to come and learn, right? It's come and get the skill. It's not come and like, you know, if somebody calls you articulate because you put a sentence together, you know, like it's not that. It is like come and just learn. And I think that is real. And I think about a place like Bowdoin, right, where there's immense privilege. People are like, I didn't know summer was a verb, right? I was like, you're summering? I was like, I don't know what that is. But that was real for so many people. You know, I'm like, that is okay. And what does it mean to be marginalized, right, in a community of privilege?
But you know, that's not what I was asking you. I was asking you about the protest. I mean, there's real need, concern, frustration in America along the lines of racial even racial brutality, just to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in terms of the response on the historically black college campus or the historically white college campus?
I think the question of inclusion, so around race it's different, right? Because there are significantly less white people at HBCUs. Around issues of inclusion, around like homophobia, sexism, gender equality, transphobia, like those issues are real.
At both campuses.
At both campuses. I think that when I've seen sort of protests, it is around the latter at HBCUs more so, just because the number of white students is dramatically lower. Or you see HBCU students taking the protest to the larger community, right? Like around inclusion. So you think about the HBCU students shut down Hillary in Atlanta. That was HBCU. It was a consortium of HBCU activists, right? Sort of pushing the larger system and structure to do right by black people.
Okay. We have another question.
Eduardo and Phoebe, your institutions are among the best in graduating low-income young people of color. But what we know is that, in fact, we have 6.7 million opportunity youth in our society, disproportionately Latino and Black, and that only 1 out of 10 low-income people in our country will earn a BA. So how can you counsel low-income young people of color about pursuing a college degree when we know that actually so many universities do a disservice to their students, and students wind up leaving with tremendous debt and without a credential that allows them to pay it back?
Okay, let me ask President Padrón and Chancellor, but President Padrón, why don't you start?
Well, this is a good question, but it requires a long answer, so I'm going to try to bring it to the facts. The fact of the matter is that our institutions, and I think we're very similar in that regard, the community have to have a sense of ownership into them. And it must be a place that from the very early years, students look forward to going to that institution. And, we work with the high schools and even with the students in the elementary schools from very early to bring them to the college, to bring programs to them, to include them in extracurricular activities, etc. We work with the parents. We work with them about understanding the financial aid system. It's a constant number of activities year-round with young people in our community to be able to understand that college is for them, that it's not an afterthought or something that is for other people. And as a result of that, at my institution, we are today the largest institution of higher learning in America. We serve about 165,000 students. And I will tell you also the most diverse. And we graduate more African Americans and more Hispanics every year than any other institution in this country. And the reason for that, the reason for that is, as I said before, our sense of inclusion has been by design, to making sure that these, especially low-income students, 68% of my students are low-income. 45% of them live in poverty by federal guidelines. And that should be not a reason for them not to be able to achieve and not to be able to graduate. And it's a state of mind. You have to work on that every day. And your faculty and your staff need to reflect that community and need to understand that. They need to be passionate about it. And that's what makes it. It's hard work, but it's the kind of work that we all must do, and it's our obligation, our duty.
Chancellor Haddon.
So we have a similar kind of posture and have great success stories as well. But I think the important point in response to your question is that the good news is that there are large public institutions now, public institutions that are forming consortia to make sure that students actually have the resources and do graduate. There are schools that are like ours, research regional universities that give the kind of support, and there are liberal arts colleges that continue to give the kind of support that is access focused, as we're describing, but also equity focused and really interested in student success. And so you do have a multiplicity of choices today. You have to be very deliberate in looking at colleges. You have to get advice about it. And you should not choose them blindly. We all know the terrible stories of debt-ridden institutions debt-ridden students who don't have the support of their institutions because they really aren't interested in successful graduation. So the focus is on graduating, staff that supports people, civic engagement, a connection to a community, and an opportunity to thrive in a community.
Okay, we have time for our final two questions, and I'll start right here.
Hello, Juan. Jamila Bay, I'm with WPFW Radio today. This is for everyone quickly. I know we're out of time. For students in colleges who for the first time are starting to understand that they are active participants, they're old enough now to take part in the democracy, they're old enough that their speech can become political and can become recognized. I want to know what this current climate, in your opinion, is doing to help further encourage that. As we talk about demographics of voters, knowing that these 18-plus-year-olds who are really seeing their speech as political movement are now going to the polling places sometimes for the first time in this climate. And I wonder how schools, how colleges are supporting that, and also...
Well, let's stop there.
Okay.
You mean how colleges are supporting political involvement in this election year?
Yes. We'll start. Okay.
Let me start. Okay.
Yeah, start there.
Right.
There we go.
You don't want to deal with that one? Do you want to answer what's going on at Yale?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that part of what maybe her question is getting at is how kind of political activism on campus maybe translates into more of political activism nationwide. And I think that you see it definitely in this upcoming election with kind of how Bernie Sanders in some ways has really taken off in a lot of young people's minds. And I think it's
specifically on college campuses.
Yes, I think specifically on college campuses, and I think that's because people are re-looking at the status quo, are re-looking at our political system and saying this isn't necessarily working for us, and we have much more maybe leftist ideas, and we have and we're thinking of things in a different way, and we want a leader that kind of reflects that.
Isn't that interesting? Because what if you said Donald Trump?
Right. I mean, I think he's the other end of the spectrum,
that
right?
Things aren't working.
Right.
We're
Things aren't
frustrated.
working.
So,
exactly.
But the campuses don't go Trump; they go Sanders.
Yes. I think it has to do with maybe people's political leanings, and not necessarily thinking that Trump has a way forward, but that he is in a lot of ways divisive, and that Bernie kind of is definitely not the status quo in some ways, but he is more he's more looking at including everyone.
So just on this final point, though, do you see the activism, the concerns on campus going to the broader society? Do you see it today in the election season?
In the election season? I do. I think that students are going to vote much more than they have in the past. Yeah.
All right, we have a final question.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Umar Bowers. I'm a physician by trade, but I'm the vice president of the United African American Alliance. And the question that I have from the beginning from Mr. Richard Louis' opening piece about the state of race, he intertwined some components of religion as well with the Paris. And also, Nailah, when you described the Halloween incident, and there was discussions about no blackface, but also no turbans, and also no, headscarves and things like that that could be insensitive. So what I'm asking is, on the college campuses and universities, are we seeing some of the same insecurities and vulnerabilities amongst targeted groups such as Muslim students, as we've seen in the past from African Americans and also Hispanics who may feel somewhat intimidated by some of the cultural things that are happening in society at large? Are we seeing that on campus? And if so, are we attacking that with the same vigor that we attack racism that's blatant with identifiable African Americans or Hispanics versus people that are also equally potentially vulnerable?
Well, let's go through the entire panel. I'll start with you, President Padrón.
Well, definitely that's an issue, especially in diverse institutions like the ones represented here. And, we deal with that the same way that we deal with all the other issues. There is no differentiation. We want to make sure those students have the right to feel comfortable, to feel safe. That's the word that has been used here quite a bit. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that we protect them.
Yes, I think that, we are talking about microaggressions, but also stereotyping. I think definitely has to do with not only Black students and Hispanic students and Latino students, but also has to do with religious minorities, especially those who you might be able to tell from either their dress or where they might be from, and people might make stereotypes out of those assumptions. So
Mr. McKesson.
Yeah, I'd only, so I'd say yes, and only add that what we're actually seeing now on college campuses is this stuff is showing up digitally as well. So you think about Yik Yak, where people are making anonymous statements that are prejudiced and racist in a whole host of ways, and it is because it's a geographic app that they know it's happening at the college campus, or Twitter and things like that, and you're seeing that spill over into people's lived reality in ways that I don't think colleges have actually responded to well yet. And students feel it, right? They see all the comments on Yik Yak. They're very specific. They know it happened. And we're seeing that hate come up that way.
But I want to come to his point about religion, I think you're specifically referencing people who are Muslim.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm saying all of it. I'm saying the hate is not only happening, like Nailah said, sort of visibly on campus, but it's happening digitally too. People are saying Islamophobic things on Yik Yak about people on campus, and it is a harder thing to manage when you can't figure out who actually said it, right? Or what dorm room it came from, because the volume is also increasing. So you see it come in waves on college campuses that sort of causes this unrest visibly on the campus itself.
Anonymity causes even further unrest.
Right.
So we were fortunate early this fall to have a student organization of Muslim young men and women to come forward and say, we are Muslim and we are not your enemy. And they invited the rest of the campus to come and talk with an imam and several other members of the community who are Muslim, and for 2.5 hours, students, about 300 in the room, were free to say what they wanted and to get a response. I think the really important part of it is that they had experts and they had supportive folks there who were able to help them frame some of the discussion, but also they had verification of a religious perspective present as well. So it was a very open place. One of the students said, it's wonderful to be in an institution where you feel able to trust your fellow citizens and students and have this kind of event. So it went on as long as people wanted to talk, and it was about 2.5 hours, 3 hours.
So we've come to the end, but I just wanted to say that in terms of State of the Race and the Aspen Institute, Comcast, and what we've done for 6 years, this, I think, could stand as a model of smart, intense discussion that avoids nothing and ask all of us as Americans to deal with race in a substantial and way that could lead to further change. We're not here for the status quo, we're here for the change, and it's as a result of conversations that move us forward, conversations like this one, that progress is possible. So I just want to ask you to join me in thanking Eduardo Padrón from Miami-Dade, joining me in thanking Nailah Harper-Malveaux from Yale, join me in thanking DeRay McKesson, and join me in thanking Chancellor Phoebe Haddon from Rutgers-Camden. Thank you all for coming.
Great. Thank you so much. Stick around because we're going to have a very quick stage change.
That was a great kickoff.
We need more.
Yeah. Intricacy. But Juan's really good. Really good. I was just saying to Clarice, I wanted to jump up there. I had stuff to say.
Okay, let's bring the next panel up. As we transition to the next panel, which will be on the changing demographics in large cities. We're pleased to welcome to moderate this the man who is, while Al Jazeera is still on the air, the anchor of America's Inside Story there. He has a distinguished journalistic career as the chief national correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and before that, the host of National Public Radio's Talk of the Nation. He's the author of 3 books, many articles and chapters. He's a household name and really a household voice, a familiar voice to all of us. Please welcome Ray Suarez, who will introduce his panel.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. I was really pleased to be asked to moderate this panel particularly because I've had a front seat for this story for my entire life. Growing up in Brooklyn, working as a reporter in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., places that have seen decades of transformation. I've covered it as a reporter. I've written about it. The book is still in print, and it makes a lovely gift. And, I think that this is the story that we tell each other about the way we live, filtered through other forms. Neighborhoods change all the time, and they change for a wide variety of reasons and in a wide variety of ways. Lately, we've been talking about it nationally in the context of gentrification, but neighborhoods change in a lot of ways. I was in a neighborhood in Cleveland a couple of years ago where right in the middle of a neighborhood that was still well populated was a closed elementary school because the surrounding area had aged in place and there simply were not enough children to keep an elementary school open in that neighborhood. That's a form of demographic change that we don't talk about very much. Sometimes we automatically assume that economic change also means racial change, both for a neighborhood on the way up or on the way down. But you can go to a lot of neighborhoods around the country, especially now, where there's economic change underway with no visible racial change. Yet, the expectations, the aspirations of the people arriving are very different from those ideas about what the place is and how life is defined there from the people who were already in place. And it provides a big challenge for NGOs and for government. Do you allow this to go on organically? Do you allow it simply to proceed and see what prevails? Or is government a necessary actor in the drama to assure a certain insistence on equity and insistence on social justice? The needs and desires of the long-term residents have to be understood and heard, as well as the needs and desires of the people who are forcing the demographic change, who are changing the numbers and making us look at this place. And I have a great panel to do this with. And I'll go from right to left. That's a spatial rather than a political designation, I assure you. Stephanie Rawlings Blake is the mayor of Baltimore, Maryland. And the last time we spoke was at the Democratic Convention in Charlotte, and she's a champion for her city. Dawn Phillips is the executive director of Right to the City, a formation of over 50 community organizations in 33 cities around the country around human rights and housing. Mayor Michael Nutter, the recent past mayor of Philadelphia, currently a senior fellow at Bloomberg Philanthropies. And Sue Chan, a member of the City Council of Fremont, California. And Mayor Nutter, I'll start with you. I was recently in Philadelphia, eating at a swell restaurant that my high school daughter, who was with me, assured me was way too hip for me, in a neighborhood called Fishtown. Sure. And it was a place to watch it happening moment by moment, what we're talking about in this panel. So we look at Fishtown, and do we walk along the streets there and say, this is great, or is there some other things you have to think about before you assess what's going on in the urban landscape in a place like that?
Well, Ray, thank you. I mean, you always have to think about it, and it's not just Fishtown; it's Northern Liberties, which, maybe 20 years ago, I think Northern Liberties did not have a name, and became Northern Liberties. Folks were moving to, Bridesburg. They're moving to Kensington. When I was in office in City Council, it was Manayunk on Main Street. So, Philadelphia, kind of the quintessential city of neighborhoods. There's a lot of change in our city. I think the diversity of Philadelphia is one of our strengths. But I was talking earlier in an interview. This is really about what people want to do and how they want to live together. Philadelphia, one of the most historic cities in the United States of America, but has also seen the largest percentage increase of millennial population of any major city in the United States of America. So there's a lot of activity going on between and among neighborhoods, and people find those places, move to them, and this is really, I think, ultimately is about respect. It's about respect of culture. It's about respect of our seniors, whether by age or by how long folks have been in a neighborhood, as well as that being open and welcoming to new people, quote unquote new people, who are just coming to the neighborhood or who are new to Philadelphia. So it's really about managed growth. It's about zoning, which, please do not let your eyes glaze over. These are actually important concepts. It's about managed growth, smart growth. Every lot doesn't have to have a building on it, and every old building is not the most precious thing in the universe. And it's really about working with community folks, neighborhood people, respecting those who have been through the rise, the fall, and now the resurgence of the community, and that the new folks don't automatically project a feeling that, while we're here to save your neighborhood, you should be grateful that we just showed up. We're making your property values go up, and development and construction is taking place. My grandmother used to remind me that, you can be house rich and cash poor. Just because the value of my house went up doesn't mean I can pay the taxes. And people should not be forced out of their neighborhood, pushed out of their homes because they can't pay their taxes. And so there are steps that the government can and must take to preserve the great history, the folks who made the neighborhood what it is, while at the same time responding to the fact that it's moving possibly in a new direction, and that everybody has to figure out how to live together.
But neighborhoods, especially in a place like Philadelphia, have been changing for centuries.
Absolutely.
How do we get to this place where we say, but now we have to preserve what used to be?
When my parents moved from South Philadelphia in the mid-'50s, the big move for some African-American families was, the big move up was to move to West Philly. We moved to 55th and Larchwood. We were the third black family on the block. By the time I was 10 years old, there were 3 white families left. It's a pretty significant change in a relatively short period of time. And now it is like probably 99.8% African-American and Latino and maybe some other folks. Change will happen. I mean, it's the one constant in life. And you look at Philly, I mean, you can go to some neighborhoods, you'll have 3 blocks, it's African-American, another 3 blocks, it's maybe Italian and Irish, another 3 blocks, you've got, Latino and Asian or whatever the case may be. All in the same space, all basically in the same neighborhood. They figure it out. But it also takes leadership and it takes support from community leaders, community-based organizations, you referred to NGOs and others who are actively engaged in the lifeblood of communities. In Philly, we have a Philadelphia Human Relations Commission because at times there are conflicts. Someone has to be that valid third party to step in and say, hey, everybody's here, nobody's moving. What's the conflict here? What are you not understanding? This group has their traditions, another group has their traditions. You all got to live together and figure it out.
Dawn Phillips, what does that imposition into the marketplace look like? Who needs defending and from what?
Well, so I want to start by addressing your question about the kind of process for change of neighborhoods. I think it's true. Neighborhoods change, cities change, communities change. I think for the work that we do, what we focus on is that this type of change is not by accident. It's actually systemic and structural in nature. So what do I mean by that? So 2 things in particular. This process of change that we're currently looking at comes from a long, multi-decade history of public policy that has driven disinvestment in many urban communities. So I live and work in San Francisco and Oakland, for example, aside from my national purview. And what have we seen? We've seen a history of redlining. We've seen urban renewal. We've seen the fact that federal transportation policies, the creation of suburbs, white flight from urban centers, all these things actually went in to create 5 or 6 decades of really systemic, structurally driven disinvestment. Our analysis is that that type of disinvestment creates the conditions for a place like West Oakland or the Mission District or East Oakland to now become very highly profitable in terms of the kind of potential to profit from what is relatively cheap land and housing values to a surrounding that is that's being very demand driven. So one, I think that it's important as we talk about this process of change to actually name the structural and the ways in which public policy and public revenues have actually driven the process. The second thing I would say is that while change happens all the time, the real question, I think, is how do we ensure that change is equitable, right? There have been previous cycles and previous rounds of neighborhoods and communities changing over, but when white communities left the Mission, when the old kind of Irish community left the Mission neighborhood, and when Irish and Portuguese folks left West Oakland, and other white folks, ethnic white folks left East Oakland, they went somewhere better. They moved to the suburbs. And at that time, the suburbs were a great place to be for white folks. It was better schools, better homes, better quality of life. However, I think the equity question is that when working class communities of color are displaced from their neighborhoods, they're not going somewhere better. What we're seeing nationally right now is the suburbanization of poverty at a period where suburbs are actually not the better place to be. So if you're moving from West Oakland or East Oakland right now, you're moving to a place like Antioch, Fremont, Pittsburgh, and these cities are well-known, well-documented to have no health infrastructure, no transportation infrastructure. It's basically very poorly resourced bedroom communities where the only thing that they have going for them is the fact that rent is relatively cheap. Now you've exchanged the fact that you now can afford your housing for a 3-hour commute one way back to Oakland where you shop, go to your hairdresser, go to church, your children still go to school there, your job is there. So it's a question, right, as to whether this current phase of what is a natural progression of change is actually benefiting. So I think it's the systemic nature and the nature of whether or not change creates greater equity and greater opportunities, or if in fact it causes further racial and class inequity.
There are winners and losers in this process constantly, and it would be disingenuous to say otherwise. But at the same time, one of the things, fortunately, unfortunately, is just the way it is, that makes you a shareholder able to demand to be left alone in place is ownership. It's the unfortunate truth of the way we assign and value space in this country, that owners can put an anchor in the ground, renters cannot. They get moved, they get shifted, they get downgraded, they get shunted, things happen. But as we watch gentrification in a place like the Bay Area, certainly, its owners actually quite often do quite well on the back end. But renters take what they can get. And that's what you've just described is a process of that happening.
Well, I think actually a lot of the black displacement, if you look at Oakland, has actually been black home ownership, the displacement of black homeowners. So just to say a few things about the question of home ownership and rent and tenancy and how these things play out. So one thing I'd start by saying is that in 2013, the 12 top banks in this country provided a total of 4 loans to black homeowners to purchase new houses in Oakland. Documented, 4, right? most of the displacement that we've seen from East and West Oakland are actually black homeowners have been displaced. Now, it's a big question, and we often talk about this concept of false choice, right? So is it a choice for you to take a buyout when you bought your house in 1972 for $18,000 and you can now sell it from someone, the last phase of gentrification we saw in the Bay, these stories are probably resonant to some of you, but there were people coming with bags of cash to make $600,000 or $700,000 cash offers to homeowners knocking on their doors and saying, I'll buy your house in its current state today for the money that's in this bag. But what do you exchange? Right? Does it work out when you essentially lose your community, lose your social bearings? It's well documented. Political power is being broken up. The fact that actually these neighborhoods, and I saw you holding Steve Phillips's book, Ray, but the fact that voting blocks, Latino voting blocks, black voting blocks, based on neighborhood organization are being broken up. A lot is being sacrificed for a one-time payment. And it's not clear, and we don't know today yet whether it's going to work out over time that we determine that there is a long-term benefit, right, to actually taking a buyout.
Right.
The last thing I would say is this country is becoming majority renter. Right? And what I mean by that is that it's already established 25 of the largest metropolitan centers in this country are majority renter cities. I think it's true of all the mayors and the council members who are sitting up here. Maybe not in Fremont.
I don't think so in Philly.
But in Oakland and San Francisco, for example, it's over 60%. True in New York and many, many places. Now, we have to make a decision as a country whether we say or not that, in fact, regardless of your whether you're a homeowner or not, we value all the stakeholders in our community. We recognize that people have made legitimate contributions and therefore have a legitimate right to determine their ability to stay or thrive in a community and not base it entirely on this question of homeownership.
Mayor, your city has faced depopulation, the challenge of controlling and consolidating geography and what to do about abandoned homes and underpopulated neighborhoods. How have you coped with that, and how have you gotten Baltimore ready for what's next?
It's a great question. I was talking to Mayor Nutter earlier, in public service for more than 20 years, and have seen the changes in many of Baltimore's neighborhoods, and many not in a good way. So I knew when I became mayor, I had an opportunity to do things differently, and I wanted to create a blight elimination plan that really worked for our city. So I challenged my housing commissioner and his team to come up with a market-driven strategy, one that works for Baltimore, that will help us to undo the decades of disinvestment, blight, and abandonment. So we created, a little over 5 years ago, Vacants to Value. And I've been very, very pleased with the multi-pronged approach, where we are working with communities where we know that the market will take years to catch up with that community. But it doesn't mean that they have to live with, blighted, vacant, trash-strewn lots. What we've done is created almost 900 community green spaces, working with volunteers and the community members to design the space so they can use it to be a place of peace and beauty instead of just trash and things like that. We created incentives for people to move into the city, and incentives that people can layer We've asked employers to work with us on live near your work incentives, and then they can layer our incentives. And for example, people that work for Johns Hopkins that want to live around the hospital have gotten up to $40,000 at the closing table for homes. So we've created those opportunities. we've cut the red tape in the process of buying a city-owned vacant property. And what we're seeing is that the investments that we're making, I quadrupled the city's investment in demolition. What we're seeing is that's leveraging more development. And we are blessed in Baltimore to be stabilizing the flight and taking advantage of some of the great neighborhoods, and honestly, taking advantage of the fact that people are being priced out of places around us. People are being priced out of D.C. We work hard to make sure people understand that Baltimore is an affordable alternative, and that's leveraging additional investment. So the things that we're doing, the governor has made a significant investment in our demolition because we have a track record, an internationally recognized blight elimination program that people see that slowly, pushing back on those years of disinvestment. So
can I jump in there for a second? When you have people who are, over time, dispersed over a wide area, there are some blocks with very few inhabited units left. And for those of you who are not familiar with Baltimore, there's a lot of row housing. So sometimes you'll have 20 or 30 homes, and only 2 of them or 3 of them are still inhabited. When you say, look, let's create a community, let's create defensible space, let's take some people from 2nd Street, some people from 5th Street, some people from 7th Street, and make a real block again. Are they ready to do it? Do they want to do it? And do they feel like they're being forced to do it?
Nobody wants to live when they're in a block where they the only occupied home in the block. That's not a choice. That's not, nobody says, I want that house in the middle of a vacant block. But it is the condition that too many families find themselves. When we encounter a block like that where there's one occupied or two, just, like we call it snaggletooth, right? The row houses are snaggletooth. Our goal is to relocate that family where they want to be and put them in no worse condition than they are now. So a lot of times what happens is if there's going to be development in that area, we can just move them from one house to the next, but a house that is in an occupied block and something that works for them. When we work, which is, I'll just say, it slows down the progress, but it makes for better development when you take the time to try to put people, make sure that you're not hurting people as we're making these, tearing down these blocks, because we don't want to put people in a worse condition. But we also have to recognize that the longer that block stays like that, I mean, we have row houses where there'll be one occupied home and 2 houses down, there's a tree coming up through the row house because it's been abandoned for so long. Like I said, nobody wants to live like that, and the only way to change it is to change it. And we have to, in many cases, tear them down and make way for new development, but that doesn't mean we tear down those lives of the people who live there.
Sue-Chan, we've been talking an awful lot about economics up until now. Let's turn the corner and start talking about politics, which is sometimes economics played with different rules. When Fremont changed as a city, did the politics there change? Did who's on the city council change? Did people's feeling of ownership about the place change? Both the people who were there before and the people who are new to the place.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to have a little bit about the history. Our city is only 60 years old. We just celebrated our 60th anniversary in January. 1956, there were 5 townships, primarily agricultural. It was Portuguese as well as Japanese American and Filipinos that had the orchards and grew the crops. And then things shifted dramatically. Silicon Valley occurred. All of a sudden, there's an attraction of people from all over the world, in particular from China and from India. And so there was an influx of these individuals to the area. Now, granted, the people that lived there, you either liked it or you didn't. And we had experienced white flight. But the people that came to Fremont were telling their people in their native countries, this is a great place to live. And they came. And that's how ethnic communities have always started throughout our history, whether it's a Chinatown, a Koreatown, barrios, what have you. So things have changed. We are now a minority majority, and it's Asian American, okay? But within that group, there are many different types of Asians. It's not just Chinese and Indo-American. There's Vietnamese, Cambodian, Hmong, Pakistani, Afghans. There's just so many. And what is the beauty of our city, I think, is that diversity that we celebrate. Now, we've been a city for 60 years. We've had 5 council members of color. So I'm the first Chinese American female, and we've had 2 Indo-Americans and 3 other Chinese Americans. So is it a reflection of our community? I would hope so. Can it get better? Absolutely.
But is it a function, in the case that you just laid out, of still large numbers of people who are not naturalized and thus don't get counted in the eventual political outcomes? Or are these people who haven't yet found their footing politically and said, I want to be on that council. I want to see that council look like my neighborhood?
Well, I would say that Asian Americans in general are the fastest growing in the United States. Their influence is there, it's significant, they have the highest income, and they're the first to be naturalized. And so when you have someone who looks like you on your city council, I think that shows that there's an interest there, but we have to be able to do the outreach. And many people have not been contacted. When you have an election, I think that the Asian population looks to ethnic media for their news source or the papers. And so is that accurate? I would hope so. But to engage those people is something that we are trying to do actively. There is an API victory group that has formed to increase the voter population in this coming election cycle so that we can have that influence. And so it's happening not only in California, but in cities that are swing states like Colorado and Virginia and Florida, where we are trying to galvanize and get people to vote and be a part of the process, and we can really make a difference.
It's kind of a lovely thing to be named Fremont, since he came to California and stole land from the Mexicans that they stole from the Indians. Sort of, even in 60 years, you're able to sort of encapsulate that great story of American ethnic succession.
Okay.
But the idea of empowerment of new communities happens in, as we've heard, various kinds of contexts. You've got a lot of new people in Baltimore who have no Baltimore roots, who have no association with Baltimore neighborhoods, the folkways, the expectations of what a year in the life of Baltimore is like. Do those people jump right in, or do they sort of still seem oriented to the places they come from?
What I've found is that people who move to Baltimore want an authentic city experience. They want a place where they can make a difference. I run into people all the time and say that's why they moved. Not only is Baltimore affordable, but it's one of the top destinations for millennials because it's affordable, it's hip, and people can engage. Now, I just want to be very clear. We understand the quirkiness of Baltimore. When people ask you what school you went to in Baltimore, they mean what high school. Like, they want to know you have roots. And if you don't, you can still play with us, but it's at arm's length. But that being said, I run into people all the time that they come here they come to Baltimore not to recreate Brooklyn and New York, but to engage in the unique communities that we have. And I'm very grateful for that because I love the uniqueness of our neighborhoods, and I don't want to lose that. And it is a delicate balancing act to be a city that is, I was very clear. I want Baltimore to be a welcoming city for people from around this country and for people from outside of our country. I know that we will be a more sustainably vital city by welcoming diversity, but I don't want us to lose our character.
Ray, may I jump in? So I think a couple of things to build off what's been said. So I think it's important for us to just admit, I mean, and there's so much about this conversation and the way it's been framed today that our work resonates so much with. But the fact of the matter is that racial demographic shifts at the national and in many cases at the local level has not produced more racial justice, right? So more of us has not meant more justice for us, right? So what do I mean by that? In Oakland, for example, we have had, since the 70s, a black mayor. You know, for a black city, we've had black mayors, you know. That coincided exactly and specifically with the most intense periods of white flight, with the pulling out from under the city of our manufacturing and our economic base. The city became a shell of itself, and who was partly to blame was our black mayors. Though it was not their fault. It was not them who was moving industry. It wasn't them who were driving the federal redevelopment policies. It wasn't them that created the freeway through our black neighborhoods. It was not, any of those decisions were not theirs to make in actuality, right? But we've had a majority city council of folks of color. We have Asian American representation, we have Latino representation, we have LGBTQ representation, and we've had very strong black leadership in Oakland. But the reality is that, and this was to reference what was talked about in the first panel, this is the exact opposite of this kind of post-racial society that people talk about. We are in a highly racialized society, and that continues to remain true for many of our communities. So I think that the fact is that we have to continue to talk about these demographic shifts within a systemic context and not within the context of individual experiences, right? I think the reality is our cities and our neighborhoods have always represented and had multiple truths and provided multiple opportunities for experiences for different communities. It is very different to live in the Mission and understand San Francisco within the context of being a Latino Central American refugee living in the Mission for 50 years, or to be a black homeowner in North Oakland, and experiencing your neighborhood and your city from that perspective, than other people who live in other parts of the city, right? So I think our cities and our neighborhoods, it is fine and it is good and it is right that people will have multiple experiences, as the mayor has said, of these spaces. But the fact is, we have to focus on how are policies being structured to ensure that everybody is access to opportunities, access to quality housing, access to political decision-making for your community. How are these things equalized and protected structurally, and focus less in some ways on the experiences of individual people, because people will make their individual experiences what they are, and that's valid.
How do you protect it structurally? What does that actually look like? Would you have to write things into statute that set aside certain powers and perquisites for certain people? I don't know. I don't understand how you protect that.
I think that's a fair question. We would say three things. One, every city has to have a clear plan and clear approach for community stabilization. So what that means for us is that there has to be policies put in place, in particular around housing, that ensures that for low-income, moderate-income people who want to stay in the community, emphasis want to stay in the community, that they are able to. That looks like rent control protections. That looks like maintaining and upkeeping quality of housing stock. That looks like eviction protections. But stabilization has to be a centerpiece of our public policy. Second, there has to be community-led, community-driven planning. What do I mean? We have to ask residents, longtime residents, vulnerable residents, to actually be a part of the process of deciding and driving the types of development that are coming into their communities and into their cities. Meaning we have to
Let me
ask
stop you
people,
right there. Dawn just made this presentation at a hearing, Mayor. You're sitting there, and you say to yourself, in your thought bubble, because you don't say it into your microphone until you've thought about it a little bit more, Does that sound like something that can work?
And Mayor, if I might add just a third element, and then you can
Quickly.
respond. Absolutely.
Quickly.
Community control and ownership.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the thought bubble, I would say those sound like very nice ideas. I'd like to try to better understand some of the things you're talking about. And in the
Mayor,
meantime,
you sound like a mayor. I love it.
once a mayor, always a mayor. And in the meantime, I need to figure out how to balance all of those interests with the fact that this neighborhood looks like hell. These folks have been complaining about the way their neighborhood looks. We need to put people to work and continue the revitalization of this particular section of, I'll say, the city of Philadelphia. And so what mayors spend a lot of their time doing is trying to balance a variety of interests. You want growth and development. You want to put people to work. You want that economic investment. And as I mentioned earlier on the first question, but that has to be balanced with what is going on in the community. And so many of the things that you talked about, and I appreciate you recognizing that for some of the things you specifically referenced, it was not necessarily the mayor or the city council making those decisions, which really then leads to, mayors don't usually build highways through communities. And so now we're really talking about what's going on with the state and the federal government and their roles in all of this. It is almost impossible for any mayor, and certainly in the current economic climate, to have anywhere near all the resources they would ever want to do many of the things that you're talking about. And so, I'm going to shift a little bit here on you, Ray. I mean, we're in one of the most intense political seasons that any of us have experienced in recent times. It really does matter. Folks haven't been paying attention. It really does matter who's in the White House. It really does. And those kinds of decisions, and who's the Secretary of Transportation, and who's running EPA, and who's running the Department of Education, and who, do folks understand what HUD is really about? I mean, we have members of Congress who vote to slash budgets over at HUD and then go to the ribbon cutting for projects that were funded by a program that they just cut last week. I mean, the level of hypocrisy in this environment is astounding. And so what happens at the city level is, we pick up trash, we fill potholes, we do what we do. But the relationship with the state and federal government in cities and states all across the United States of America, I think is critically important in how we engage with the federal government. The federal government has a role and responsibility for many of the things that you're talking about, and often are really off the hook or are MIA on a bunch of these issues.
The fact that you cited the EPA makes it sound like you assume a Democrat is going to win in November.
I'm working on it every day.
Councilwoman, Dawn just testified at your hearing. How do you build in these guarantees of equity that people who don't want to be pushed out are not pushed out? Are these workable in the marketplace that your residents operate in?
Well, one of the things that we've done is that we have a Human Relations Commission as well. And we just recently had a 2-day symposium on racial equity where we had members of all of the diverse, wonderful population come together to have an opportunity to exchange ideas and to share their issues. And sometimes we don't hear about that. One of the things that came out of that was the Muslim population felt that the Chinese population was not sensitive to their issues. Now, as a council member who has...
What form would that take?
Well, they were saying that it had to do with the way that the Muslim news was being portrayed in the ethnic newspapers. Now, we don't have control over what that's freedom of press, of course, but a lot of times there's this misunderstanding. I'm going to give you an example of in our community we have a very large Sikh population. They have a Gurdwara that's in the hills of Fremont, a beautiful place. However, because of the cultural, the religious customs of the Sikh religion. You have a lot of chanting, you have free food, that is meals that are given every day. You have ceremonies that could be a little too noisy for the neighborhood. And so the residents are very upset about that. So what do? They complain. And they complain about the traffic and the noise and the inconvenience and the litter and a whole host of issues. But really underneath that, is there, because of the racial, religious tension, is it really the traffic, or is it because they don't want the Sikhs in their neighborhood? So these are things that we grapple with, and so we try to address that with, talking to the Gurdwara. These are the things that you have to do. These are the hours. Let's see, the traffic. You can't.
But you can only suggest, because you can't.
Well, we can enforce.
Restrain. You can't restrain when ceremonies are. That's a First Amendment violation too.
Sure, but if it's a large group, there are permits that have to be applied for. Notice is given to the residents so that they know that there are things that are within our ability to control.
It's amazing, the front edge of these kinds. I've never heard that particular problem described in an urban challenges forum before. Q&A time. Please line up at the mics. Tell us who you are. Ask a question. You all are familiar with questions. Your voice goes up at the end. You actually want to know something that the other person knows, and you are not telling us something you know instead, which is called a speech. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Richard Ezeki with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I thank you all for your time. I want to specifically pose this question to Mayor Nether and Mayor Rollins-Blake. I want to ask you, what are the influences of metropolitan planning organizations? They have a lot of them have a lot of impact on transportation plans, and also some of them have impact on housing development in your major cities. And a lot of the times, many MPOs, because they don't think about equity issues, you find that a lot of the development they have is very much skewed away from allowing communities of color to develop. So can you talk about a little bit about your experience with the Baltimore MPO, also Philadelphia MPO on these issues? Thank you.
I see that you can look around the country and find these planning organizations having different effectiveness and inclusiveness. And what I can say is you can also find that power of the planning organization being enhanced or curtailed by the people that are controlling the money. So in Baltimore, we put together over a Republican administration and a Democratic administration, put together a very comprehensive transportation plan called the Red Line, with the goal of connecting people to where people needed to be, education, opportunity, and jobs. And it was very clear that this Red Line plan not only would connect people to jobs, but it would create jobs in the process, because we worked very hard with organized labor to ensure that the opportunities that were created along the way would be a benefit to the people of those communities. When the Republican governor came in, he cast that plan out without even a conversation. So while the MPO and all of the work that had been done to create that plan, I think, was inclusive and had the potential to be very empowering, the person in power made sure that that didn't happen. So you can have all of the plans in the world, if you don't have the money behind it or the political will behind it, it's not going to happen.
I had a very positive experience with our MPO, Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC. But I will tell you, and I know the mayor knows as well, we have heard some horror stories from other mayors across the United States of America in dealing with some of these organizations. And the Department of Transportation, the federal, is quite well aware of some of those challenges. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it really is more of a localized circumstance. We've benefited tremendously from their partnership with us and our active engagement with them. Infrastructure improvements, bridges, roads, SEPTA, our Regional Transportation Authority, has benefited from DVRPC and the surrounding counties. So, I mean, we really took a regional approach to much of what I was trying to do as mayor. Philly, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery counties, those 5 counties represent 40% of the economy of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so our, kind of tucked down in that right-hand corner of the state, working together, we were able to get much more done and share in that big pie than, constantly fighting for, every nickel and dime. As long as we could see up on the big board that everyone was really getting something, and true planning is, 10, 15, 20 years out in many instances. So I need some money now, and I need to see that I'm going to get some over time, and everyone else is getting a little piece of the action, and then you can make things work. In other places, like I said, horror stories about what's going on, and I think we saw some of that play out in the economic recovery after President Obama, almost with obviously CBC members and others, single-handedly brought the country back from the brink. When none of the House Republicans voted for the economic recovery plan and only 3 in the Senate. Giving that money to states, and in many instances, those larger regional planning organizations, I think many would admit, was probably the wrong way to go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, next.
Hello, my name is Shane Bernard. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I work at Blavity, which is a multimedia startup company. I guess my question could be posed to you, former Mayor Nutter and Mayor Rawlins-Blake, but something that I've always been grappling with was the role of colleges and universities in major cities and how that plays a role in the changing dynamics of our cities. As someone who's grown up close to Temple University, I've seen the massive changes in North Philadelphia, football stadiums, but at the same time as a public university.
Well, they haven't built it yet. Haven't built it yet.
In the works. But I've always felt included in that community with Temple, and I think that they made it a core part of their mission to make sure that they have a healthy relationship with the neighborhood that they exist in. But then you look at other schools, private schools, or schools like, in my experience, LaSalle University or St. Joe's University, that kind of have a school on top of the ivory tower, at the top of an ivory tower feel to it, where they're not really connected. I'm just wondering, what responsibility do these schools have in continuing to maintain community partnerships or relationships?
I don't think it's a matter of whether it's a public school or a private school, whether or not they feel as if they're a part of the community or act as if. I think it's a matter of the leadership of those schools. What I did as mayor was to bring all of those colleges and our hospitals together and say, listen, we are the colleges and universities in our the hospitals, colleges, universities in our city represent billions of dollars in spending power, billions in economic development. How can we, as a community, as a group of anchors, decide that those billions will be a benefit to the people of our city? So we came up with the anchor plan, and I think we're the first one in the country that has all of the hospitals and universities make an agreement, sign on to an agreement that they will coordinate economic development, coordinate public safety, coordinate buying, coordinate hiring. Hopkins just announced a plan where they're focused on creating pathways for people, and they do a very good job already, but they're going to enhance that. People that have obstacles to employment, creating those pathways to good jobs. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because I pulled people to the table and said, how can we work better together? And when we did that, I think that colleges and universities and hospitals started thinking differently about their role in the community.
And I'll pick up from there. Philadelphia, to paint a little bit of a picture, 35, 36, 37% of the jobs in the city of Philadelphia are tied to education and medicine. We have 5 medical schools in the city of Philadelphia. 1 out of every 5 doctors in the United States of America will do some part of his or her training in Philadelphia in their career. So colleges and universities and the medical centers or medical schools or hospitals are economic engines in and of themselves. They must grow. They must reach out. They bring dollars in. University of Pennsylvania is the #2 NIH grant recipient in the United States of America. CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, #1 virtually in the world, and is the #1 NIH grant recipient of pediatric hospitals in America as well. Many, many of North Philadelphia residents, West Philadelphia residents, West Oak Lane work at colleges and universities. So they bring employment. And we've got 400,000 young people getting an education at 101 colleges and universities in the tri-state area, which is one of the reasons we've had such great millennial population growth. Come get an education and stay. 8 years ago, 28% of our non-native Philadelphia students were staying in the city. Today, 49%. So you're going to have conflicts. And so whether it's somebody wants to build a stadium, this one wants to build a new housing development, we're tearing this building down, we're building more housing, many more of the students want to stay on campus, great thing, but is there displacement, all those kinds of issues. In Philly, I think many of our colleges and universities, so I went to Penn, graduated in '79, and I saw much of what was taking place in West Philadelphia, and I think it was pertinent to many of the other schools. In the '70s, explosive growth, an active, aggressive posture to get African Americans in colleges and universities, significant increase in financial aid during the Carter years, which then dissipated tremendously in the change of election in 1980 with Ronald Reagan coming into office. But community relations were probably at their worst in many of those same neighborhoods. So they learned from that experience. And so are they perfect? No. Have they gotten better? Absolutely. And much like Mayor Rawlings-Blake said, many of them have their own economic opportunity plans. They are increasing and improving with regard to hiring black firms, Latino firms, Asian firms, female firms, and disabled business owners. So I think that it's ultimately all about community engagement and relations. And so whether you want to build a stadium, you want to build more buildings, you need a parking lot, you need whatever it is you need, talk to the community. And more oftentimes than not, you can work it out. And when you build that new building, make sure you hire some folks from the neighborhood.
If you want to go back to school, there is a fabulous doctoral dissertation in this because it's a national phenomenon. The mayor's just talked about the particular cases of Baltimore and Philadelphia, but whether it's Yale and New Haven, University of Chicago and the south side of Chicago, Columbia and Morningside Heights, there's a long history to this, where in places where real estate was tight, where land was built out, where neighborhoods were perceived as being in nonstop decline, that this was a timeline that was going to play out and only go in one direction. Universities leveraged their institutional clout and threatened to leave in many cases, or threatened to do all their future expansion in satellite campuses away from their historic cores, and use that as a form of brute force to change the way streets ran, to change the density of adjoining neighborhoods, to change where multiple dwellings were built and where single-family housing was built. They are big, heavy, iron-fisted players, colleges and universities. And, ask any mayor, and they'll tell you. But there's also kind of a toolkit, because some places have tremendous positive relations with their adjoining neighborhoods. Trinity University in Connecticut, one of the real pioneers in this regard. And I think Penn, in more recent decades, opened itself to the city and became a place where people who could only dream of someday going there were actually felt like it was a part of the fabric, of the operating tissue of their city, a place that they could go. And then there are places that build great big walls that look like medieval fortresses around themselves to keep those other people out. And I tell you, it's one of the great stories. As industries have left cities, and universities, as the mayor noted, have become bigger municipal players, there's a lot of ways that that story can go, many of them good and many of them bad. I am getting the cut sign, and any good program host knows that one of his most important jobs, along with keeping it interesting, keeping it moving, is ending on time. So thank you all very much, and thank my guests. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thank you guys for joining us for the town hall. We've changed the format up a little bit differently. We hope to have an incredible, engaging discussion. Please feel free to, take part in the discussion on social media as well. The hashtag is State of Race. And let's welcome back our moderator, Juan Williams of Fox News.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for what I thought was a terrific morning on the topic of race, and in the way that it's done here at the Aspen Institute for the State of Race Conference, much more emphasis on people having conversation about how change can take place and how we as individuals can become agents of change, less so on statements and anger and showing off. That's Aspen, that's the State of Race, and that's why we get together annually to try to understand where we are when it comes to that most complex and troubling issue of race and difference in a fast-changing American society. I wanted to start this town hall session where, as you heard from David Cohen of Comcast, we want all of you to participate. You are all on the panel right now. And the idea would be that you would participate, help us to understand where we are when it comes to inclusion, both on the college campus, as you heard in the first panel, but also when it comes to the cities, fast-changing cities impacted by gentrification, economic turmoil, and economic tumult in some cases. So I wanted to put it, though, in terms of the political season we're in 2016, what we're seeing on the Republican side, Donald Trump as the top candidate for the moment, and on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton is the top candidate. In both cases, really sharp departures of opinion and perspective, not only on politics and policy, but on race, on immigration, on women's rights, on the issue of difference and the other in American society. Now, we have the privilege of still having Richard Louis with us, so I wanted to ask Richard to kick it off and tell us a little bit about how you see it as a journalist. I really liked your piece, by the way. When it comes to the politics of 2016 and this idea of inclusion beyond the neighborhood, beyond the college campus.
Yeah, thank you so much, Juan. And what a tough question that is. But I'd have to say, as I was watching the results come in, and I was watching Nevada specifically, as well as Florida, and the question we talk about inclusion is participation, right? And we've had an amazing 2 cycles when we look at participation and inclusion in terms of the elections on the national level. And so when I was watching those who were engaging in those 2 states, which I think reflect Florida and Nevada, for me at least, the fabric of our country in spaces that are important to the discussions we've had so far, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. And just a remark on that, when you ask the questions that you were asking, as well as Juan, as Ray, is, are you ready for the answer? And I thought we did a great job so far, at least I really enjoyed it, because it's a 30-layer sandwich, if you've got the appetite, when you ask those questions. And that really is what we're seeing, I think, in the elections, too. But I'm not seeing the numbers. I'm not seeing them come out in the numbers. And I'm talking about the communities, the 3 major communities that we've been discussing so far. And that's the African-American community, Latino-American, and Asian-American Pacific Islander community. They're not there. The numbers aren't there as of yet. It's early, and we'll see in the general. So I think as you asked me that question of, within the context of the state of race that we were discussing today in the election, I'm watching those numbers. And what are the issues that will determine these three communities to participate at the same levels or at greater levels than we saw in the last two cycles? Because as I was saying earlier, I believe the stakes are as at least just as high, or if not greater.
I would agree. Is Ray Suarez here? No. Well, in that case, let me ask someone to raise their hands, someone who would like to participate on this question of how inclusion transfers from the conversations we were having before about the college campus and the neighborhood into the national conversation that's now taking place with regard to the 2016 election.
Hi, so I'm Karen Fleshman. I'm a white Methodist lawyer, lifelong advocate for the rights of women and children, and a very reluctant voter in this election. I don't feel like these candidates are representing my issues. I don't feel like they care about me. They don't care about race, which is one of the primary issues that I care about, or racial justice. And so I think that the reason why we're not seeing the numbers is because the communities are not feeling engaged, and I don't think the campaigns are speaking to them. And if I'm reluctant to vote for someone so parallel to me in demography, I can only begin to imagine how folks who don't feel that parallel feel about voting.
Now, when you said them, who are you talking about? The Republicans, the Democrats? Because I see, when I look at the results, the lack of turnout that Richard was talking about, but I do see strong turnout specifically for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side among minority groups.
You see strong turnout for, well,
strong voting patterns. That's the voting pattern.
But look at how well she's faring among young voters or upcoming generations. I think she's really struggling to engage younger voters and to build into new communities that are coming up now.
And so the question that we're trying to focus on in this discussion is, how does that play into inclusion? Do you have then, is it your fear that in fact the message coming from the politicians disincentivizes minorities, women, from participating in the political process?
I think that until we have candidates who are inclusive themselves and who demonstrate these values, not just with their words, but with their actual actions and with their histories, their public service over a great deal of time, of being able to engage across difference and really overcome their own implicit biases to be able to treat people with dignity and respect that they deserve, I think you'll continue to see levels of disengagement, or you'll see a whole new crop of elected officials. My hope is that you'll see new younger entrants into politics representative of these communities who are going to fight and create the respect that their communities deserve by demonstrating their political power.
All right, well, let's keep moving on this point then. We're talking again about how we transfer the concept of inclusion from neighborhoods and college campuses to the broader political structure. Mr. Mir, I heard you say during one of the panels that you're working every day to get a Democrat elected. We just heard concern that in fact there's lower levels of participation coming from minority communities, and the question I think is, does that mean they'll stay home?
No. And I think I only heard a part of the exchange back and forth. Just a couple facts. First and foremost, and I think, Juan, you pointed this out, it is abundantly clear as the presidential campaign at least has swung through the South, and now we're out west, and then we'll be back east, that Secretary Clinton is in fact benefiting significantly from a significant response from the African American community and Latino communities to her candidacy. And then it was mentioned earlier about young people. You know, African Americans, Latinos, not monolithic. Young people are not monolithic, have a lot of things on their mind. One of the things I think is exciting, certainly for the young people, is that, at least according to Senator Sanders, virtually everything in America will be free. Right. So, I mean, you know, you can get excited about that message. You know, I think, so it's a battle going on here, really, for the head and the heart. And how do you get things done? How do you make things happen? We've seen some of the challenges that President Obama has experienced with this Congress, which stands in the way, including standing in the way of even a hearing for a nominee to the United States Supreme Court. Every other president in modern history who has won 2 elections has served a full 8 years. He gets to be president until January 20th, 2017 at 12 noon. Except this president, according to the Senate Republicans, who is now no longer president. But he has done his constitutional duty and put up a candidate, and they should do their job. So
You think
I mean,
that's racial?
Yeah. I mean, Ray Charles can call that one. So, and then, I mean, again, with as we've seen this presidential race play out on the Democratic side, Senator Sanders does very, very well in communities that are not particularly diverse, and Secretary Clinton has at times been challenged, particularly with white males or middle-class white males who are not hearing the jobs message, or you know, they're anti-establishment or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the United States of America right now, but at least on the Democratic side, there is a real contest, not a circus, and these are 2 quality candidates who are talking about things that really matter. So we'll get through the primary season. There'll be a Democratic nominee, there'll be a Republican nominee, and at that point, all of us need to be much more serious about what's going on here. It actually does matter.
About, I think the focus here, the question was inclusion, that you don't have a sense that minorities, women, feel that they don't have voice, that they can't be heard in this 2016 political cycle.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if that's about race or if that's just about politics and government and the erosion that people have felt about anything.
The point earlier was made that you've seen lower levels of turnout among minority groups so far, but you're not fearful going towards November.
No, I mean, I think there will be a full engagement by those who want to vote. I think the larger issue here is why are people not voting? Not just in this election cycle. We've seen this all across the United States of America. And, you know, is it voter ID laws? Is it, you know, unfulfilled promises? Is it, you know, you all can't, include myself in that, you all elected officials can't seem to get anything done? Does it matter? All of that. Those go to the heart and soul of what democracy is all about. And if people lose faith in the system, then we've got an even bigger problem than, you know, what the candidates do or what they say or whatever the case may be.
Ms. Chan, I wanted to ask you to join in here because I think we're also talking about the Asian community, and we're talking about whether people feel that they are being heard and they're included. You think about the minorities in the country, and oftentimes people, you know, start with the African American community, but the largest is now the Hispanic community. And then you have the Asian community growing in rapid numbers, and especially, I think the fastest growing group of immigrants in the country is Asian. So what about political participation and inclusion? Do people feel like they have a right to participate in this structure?
Well, yes, and that's the message that we have to carry to the community, to let them know that if they don't participate, their concerns are never going to be heard. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about health care and access to health care. They're concerned about housing and, you know, putting food on the table. You know, Asians are not the model minority inclusively. There is diversity within that diversity. And so there are many people, especially in the Pacific Islander community, that are living in poverty. And so if you can't connect with them and explain to them that by voting, you are part of, you can change, you can make that change, be an agent of change. And so it's very important that we mobilize our community to let them understand that their voice, their vote counts, and it can make a difference. And this is why Republican or Democrat, they are all courting the Asian American communities. And they understand that if they come out and vote and register and vote, it can make a big difference. And so you see that nationally, states all over are courting the Asian American community.
Okay, so let's extend it then to young people. And let me ask you, do you see young people staying away because they feel like nobody's hearing them, or do you see young people coming into the feeling that they can be included in the political process 2016?
Right, so on the question of inclusion, I think what a lot of young people are looking at is, specifically, I am more knowledgeable about kind of the Democratic primary campaigns, but I think that both Hillary and Bernie are very much vying for both the black vote and the youth vote. And I think what a lot of young people are looking at is, you know, are they for real, or is this just posturing? And so you had a Bernie Sanders campaign in which I believe it was not a commercial, but an ad in which he had, Freddie Gray's daughter, or Eric Garner's daughter. And I think it's, and you know, Hillary, just after her wins in the primaries, was very much speaking to the concerns of millennials. But I think the question is, are they just posturing, or is this really something that they're trying to include our voices in? And I think that that is a question that a lot of people are still trying to figure out, with a lot of the kind of vying for these different, subgroups of voters.
DeRay, would you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll say, I remember in August of 2014, we were in the street in St. Louis and people told us to go vote. And we were like, the voting wasn't stopping tear gas, it wasn't stopping the police, right? So there was this thing about, I remember we said then Harriet didn't vote for her freedom, right? This notion of people had to push systems to be better. I do think that voting is a part of the solution, and I worry that the messaging from the older generation has not said this is one way to make change, but has instead said this is the only way to make change. And I think that that message is actually what turns people off. And I do think there are people who feel like a vote for a candidate is legitimizing a system that has never worked for them. And I think people feel like that. Whether it is right or not, I think the feeling is real. And I would encourage people, I met with Hillary, met with Bernie, met with President Obama, and talked to Loretta Lynch, and there's so many people, and they are asking us to support getting the Voting Rights Act back. And people do not see how the government has positively impacted their lives, and that storytelling has to happen to invest people in it. What I know to be true, and what we all know to be true, is that the government's going to exist tomorrow whether you vote or not, right? So it is more important that you put some stake in the ground, because in the absence of that stake, there are a whole lot of people who don't like people who look like me who are surely going to put their stake in the ground, right? But I do think that the story of how the government is going to potentially be better for people, or has done good work, is an important story to tell for people to be invested in the system again.
That's so interesting to me. So you think, in fact, it may be a result of lack of feeling that they are agents of change, that people say, you know what, I'm just not going to vote. It's not that anybody's depressing my vote, taking away my polling station, discouraging me. It's that I personally just don't see a need for being included in this, what they may consider to be a charade, politics.
It's never worked, right? So this idea that my vote never matters, I keep voting people in, still got tear gassed, right? Voted my whole life and it didn't change, right? And I think that the feeling is real. Whether that is true or not, the feeling, I think, is definitely real. I think that there are people energized by Bernie. I think there are people who are energized by Hillary. I think with both of them, though, it took outside pressure to say talk about race, as opposed to just talk about it because it's the right thing to do, right? Black people existed way before this primary election. And it is hard to see people, even people you like, only talk about economic injustice around racial lines when people steal take the mic from them, right? And I think that that is hard for a lot of the younger generation.
All right, who wants to jump in? Well, wait till you get a mic. Here we go.
Don't always need one, but there we go. Thank you. Is it also fair to say that the concepts of engagement and inclusion are subsequent to ownership? Because I think what happens in a lot of the minority populations that I've seen and I've experienced is that you don't necessarily feel like this country belongs to you. And I would consider myself an exception to that rule. But we hear a lot of times on one side of the political spectrum, and I'm not identifying one way or the other, but we hear on one side of the spectrum, you're a great American, or you're a great patriot, or this country, needs you. And on the other side, it's insinuated that you're less of an American. And this is sometimes, I think, permeates into the general electorate, is that, African Americans, generally speaking, don't vote very much in midterms or on statewide and regional and local elections. But in the national cycle, every 4 years, the turnout does go up. But I think that's part and parcel of the fact that there's a lack of ownership of you feeling like you're not only an American, but this is home for you. And whether you're an immigrant or not, but as an American or a naturalized citizen, I think there's got to be some perhaps rewiring of the education, and that people need to realize that if you are a minority in this country and you happen to be an American citizen, then you have just as much a right to impact change as others. Sure, there may be some level of desperation and exacerbation from people who voted for many years and haven't seen the change that they want, but I think a lot of times it goes back to, do you really feel like this is your country? I happen to feel like this is my country, and I don't feel like a second-class citizen by any stretch, but I'm not sure that is the same thought process that is shared by the majority of minority populations.
Well, this is kind of an incredible moment here. We're talking about inclusion, and we're hearing this message that people really may feel like, their voice has not been heard, they haven't been included, they're not allowed to really express or get response, but you have a black president. And yet people think that they somehow didn't make a difference. I find that kind of stunning, just on the surface. But help me, somebody help.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to quote Don King, who said, my people built this place and I know my way around. There have always been those disaffected voters who never read Orwell when they were young and feel that it's a choice between, if I am a sheep, would I prefer for the lion to eat me or the wolf to rip me apart? Because it's the same thing no matter what you do. However, I don't believe that. I don't think the facts bear that out. Let's talk about some of the facts that we know. Statistically speaking, the most powerful and most engaged voting bloc, statistically speaking, is a black American woman. Okay, black women put Barack Obama in the White House in 2008 and resoundingly so again in 2012. Black women show up at the poll with they mama, they sister, they hairdresser, and cousin Bibi and Nene. Black women bring more non-voters to the polls than any other group there is in this country. So everybody with a black mother, sister, person in their life is literally being touched by somebody who understands the power of that ballot, who understands the power of that voting bloc, which she belongs to. By Anita, okay, let's look at Chicago. Anita Alvarez, that prosecutor who knew about the tape of Laquan McDonald, a year before it was forced to be released and did nothing about it. In Chicago, forgive me, so Chicago is one place. In Cleveland, the prosecutor that declined to press charges when 2 officers got out of a car and within seconds, 12-year-old Tamir Rice was shot dead. That prosecutor who declined to prosecute got voted out there too. So for those black folks and other folks too, but I'm speaking about the demographic that I belong to, that I've extensively researched in my own work. When folks said, okay, enough is enough, let's go local, let's show up and oust these people, change what's happened. The problem is that on the national level, districts are so completely gerrymandered that it's impossible for those black majorities, again, I'm speaking specifically to the area of my expertise right now. Those black majorities have been broken up because I am District A and this person here is District B, which makes no sense. But it guarantees that a particular party will be elected. These are the laws that are encouraging the voter suppression that we see. This is the voter fraud that we see, not me trying to vote as my dead grandmother. These are the issues that a lot of our mamas and sisters and grandmamas are talking about. And when we link arms and bring other people to the polls, this is what we're seeing. There is a change happening. There's a change happening in the way people are voting now. We understand that there are rigged systems, mostly gerrymandered in a lot of places, but the numbers in key races to do key things, oust that prosecutor, put in this particular person, that can happen. Last thing I want to say, because this hasn't come up at all.
Wait, let's stay on this point.
Okay.
And we're
All
going to be here for now.
you know, I'm just so passionate about this.
Well,
Thank
I
you for
appreciate it
having
because
this.
I think, DeRay, you were saying, you know, people, are we going to see that? But, you know, I thought Jamila made an excellent point that black women definitely get out and vote. And I don't think there's any question when we come back to what the mayor was saying about the Clinton campaign. I don't think there's any question they have propelled her vis-a-vis the kind of populist energy we've seen for Bernie Sanders on the thing. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. You said something? No, we're talking about in this race in 2016, right? That's what I was saying. Yeah. Anyway, we have a special guest, a mystery guest, from the political structure herself. Yes, a leader of the political structure. So, please.
So I won't identify myself. I'll keep it a mystery.
Okay, you're gonna keep it a minute. No.
But I want to focus on what you, Jamila, because it made me think about how I was nurtured in this political process. My name is Mignon Clyburn. I'll let the mystery out of the bag. And I grew up and being raised continually by a political family. And what you said is so true. One of the reasons that you brought up about the differences in midterms and national turnout is just because we don't see where our votes count. And we don't see where our votes count, and why do we feel that way? What is perpetuating that? I counter, with some risk of me saying this, the current construct. We don't look at other constructs around the world that will allow for some proportional type of voting, that your voice will be heard in more of a weighted fashion as opposed to almost this winner-take-all gerrymandered approach. And I don't think we have enough conversations about there are other types of constructs that could possibly even change that. If I see that I have a voice on city council as opposed to a county-wide or some type of orientation that won't allow for my voice to be heard, maybe then somebody will say, that's my person, because in a proportional sense I voted. And so there's some things that I think we could challenge on a state, local, and national level that could change that, would have a voice, and would change that paradigm of just every 4 years you see this uptick, and every other year in state and local elections we see this flat 12. It's not uncommon for 20% voter turnout to elect a mayor. Something's wrong with that. Or to elect city council.
So to come back, I just want to make sure we stay on point in this conversation. Because
okay, I'm sorry. I'm famous for
No, you didn't. You were on point. But I just want to say, this is about inclusion. This is about people choosing to participate and feeling that the political structure in 2016 reflects their will, their concerns, their agenda. You're at the FCC.
Yes.
Do you see that in terms of the political pressure on media in America?
Yes. And I say that with hesitation because I have to go back home to another house that says FCC. But yeah, because all of this is reflective. We can look at how the races are handled now. It is very much influenced by where the media thinks the headline and the uptick in their numbers of the day will be. So you can't, all of these things are coupled and influenced and driven, in some cases, to our dismay, by all of this. So yes, it's all a straight line, and and if you have more of a voice at the state, local, and federal levels, by maybe challenging ourselves to change the current construct, then I think we will see the shifts in the types of conversations.
So if people vote, they can create change, even in terms of American media, is what you're saying.
And the change will be covered. That change and the aspects of those change and the process of that change will be covered. So yes, it's definitely much when you see trends moving, and if you're doing your job as a journalist, Yes, absolutely.
But what you heard from DeRay was people still don't feel as if that vote is definitely going to make a difference. It doesn't stop. I think I'm quoting you right. Didn't stop them from getting tear gassed.
And a part of the reason I counter that it doesn't is because the system in and of itself, our voting construct is not one that lends itself for multiple voices to be heard. There are hamlets in New England and there are places around the world, and I keep going back to the proportional voting, that you will have a voice. It might not be a majority voice, but it will be a voice. But the way we have it set up, if it's a county-wide and you got to get the entire county, you may not get the entire county, but you might get 49% of the county. 49% of a voice is greater than zero. No, I'm with you. We're on the same page.
And I do think there's something about telling that story differently so people can see that voting is a way to bring about change. I think Chicago is an interesting example recently of people organizing sort of to change people and to say, the organizer said immediately, well, Kim Foxx doesn't have a clean slate. We're going to hold her accountable too, right? Which is an important message that it wasn't like just get Anita out. It was replace her and hold those people accountable too, I think is a good model.
Charlie Firestone.
Yeah, so that point about proportional representation was really raised by Lanny Guinier in the early 90s and really cut down, I thought, unfairly because it was really an idea. But that's what cumulative voting is in corporations. It's done in various places, and it's an idea that really maybe makes sense. It's just very hard in this country to get that going. But that is an interesting idea that I just wanted to reinforce that that's something that could be done if there were political will.
And if you had that kind of proportional voting, then you would say it would lead to then proportional representation of minorities?
So here's how, just take an instance. You have, say, 10 congressional districts in a state right now, and they're geographic. What you could do is say, you have 10 votes. You're in the state of North Carolina. I don't know how many Congress people they have. You have 10 votes. You could put all 10 votes into one person. Or 5 in one person and 5 in another. And what that allows is for minority communities, if they, focused on a few people to get, let's say there's 40% minorities, you could strategize so you could get 40%
rather than
minorities.
having the minority vote dispersed across districts
Right.
and therefore oftentimes not
Right.
produce
Right.
an official.
It's an idea that happens in, as I said, in some countries and some corporations.
Okay. Chancellor, I wanted to get you in the conversation. Again, we've heard a little bit about young people and political participation. The young people on your campus, is your campus mostly minority?
No.
No. So your campus, I'm sorry.
It's mostly first generation.
Okay.
45% or so.
What's your experience on that campus then? By the way, what's the age range?
Multiple. They range from.
No, but I mean, most students are
older.
Older students. That's very interesting. So this is an older campus. Do you see that those people feel that they have political voice in America today?
I think that some do and some don't. It is really not a straightforward understanding of what their rights are. I think they are politically astute and do participate in voting. And I think that it's really important for us to tell people the story about why it's so important to vote, even if it's for symbolic purposes, because it really represents a way of identifying with a past that was so destructive and was given, new light by the ability to vote. I'm sitting here just saddened by a notion that we don't remember how we got the right to vote. Women, and certainly African Americans and others in the 60s. In the 60s, we were talking about these issues. So for us to think that our votes don't count.
Well, you should talk to DeRay. He's sitting right next to you.
I am. I'm speaking to him right now. But he said the story hasn't gotten out there. So we need to, we got some homework to do. if the story is that focused on the shortness of memory, because we didn't have the right to vote. We could not vote.
Okay.
We laid down our lives to vote.
Can we get a microphone over here?
Hi, my name is Victoria Massey. I'm a reporter with Vox.com. And I think one of the things we also need to talk about in terms of just like not only the panels, but even right now, we're talking about how people of color, I don't like the term minorities, particularly in this conversation, how we understand count. I think we're talking about it very much so in a quantitative sense and not also dealing with the quality, right? So even we're talking about inclusion. I think it's important not to predicate the way, not only people of color, but also like I think young people of color, that the way they are understanding count to be just solely on the vote, as DeRay was making a point about. And so it's important, I think, especially when you're talking about or thinking about events like, again, going back to Chicago, because I think it's just in general their legacy of organizing and what folks are doing right now is very important, not only in general, but also what's been going on with the political campaigns. And so I'm going very much so to the Trump rally. And I think one of the things we have to understand is that even if we hear people, particularly young people of color who may be undecided or just not impressed by, for instance, like on the Democratic side, either Hillary or Bernie, that does not mean that people don't understand, are not participating in the political situation. And so I think that comes from the fact that like folks do not necessarily see their, do not base how they count solely on the vote, that they are participating in ways that push, but do not depend on a political situation that very much so oftentimes has let them down, and they know that. I mean, that's a part of, again, the resistance to make sure people are held accountable. And so you had, in terms of Chicago, people, remember that people were chanting at the Trump rally, like Bernie Sanders, and there was a way that, I think I'm speaking from the media standpoint, that it was easy for people to try to pin this on, okay, there were Bernie Sanders supporters who disrupted a Trump rally, which makes for a really easy narrative, particularly when it comes to like Democrats versus Republicans. But it's much more complex than that. You had organizers from various activist organizations in Chicago, not just broadly Black Lives Matter, as some folks put in the headlines, because that makes it very easy in terms of like a search or clicking. Who had been doing this work alongside, for instance, the Buy Anita campaign. I mean, there are folks who are my age, who are young people of color, who are very much so organizing against a broader systemic issues of injustice, and who understand that that work comes from, at times, maybe seeing an overlap, maybe with politicians or not, but not basing it solely on that. And I think we're going to talk about inclusion. We have to include that in the conversation to make space for those kinds of possibilities. And also make space for polling issues that don't necessarily give as much nuance to African Americans as you do white voters, to people of color voters in general.
Hold on, thank you. So let me just say, when we think about inclusion and we talk about a political structure, when you see the tremendous turnout of voters for Trump, you understand the power of a vote. And you're saying we have to make space for people who may not view their power in terms of casting that vote, but are you suggesting therefore that people should be free to say, I'm political, I just don't vote. I choose not to participate in that way.
I mean, I'm not one to tell people I'm not here to tell people what they do or do not do in terms of voting. I think it's making space for people that, for instance, have the choice to, free choice. I mean, even talking about, some people just aren't able to vote. Like, we actually have policies that make it impossible for some folks to vote, and lots of those people are people of color. And so they're not going to be those people who are Trump supporters more often than not. So it's that we don't exist in a world right now that offers a free opportunity to choose for everybody. And again, that comes to the qualitative notion of how we understand voting to count.
Okay, well, I tell you, my perspective is voting counts, but I don't think it's the case that you have to ignore people who participate in different ways, but I just don't think that there's any doubt. So please, everybody, join in this conversation. Here's the microphone. Thank you.
Dante Hilliard, YWCA USA. I'm intrigued by this. We've been talking about inclusion all day, but and as a former university administrator, yes, part of the concept of inclusion is about feeling of belongingness. Those of us who work at universities, we know that phrase is in all the climate studies, feeling of belongingness. But we need to also understand and admit that part of inclusion is not on the onus of the minoritized population, but it's on the onus of the institution, that inclusion is about policy. The Boston Tea Party was not just about belongingness to England, it was about unjust policies, no taxation without representation. So inclusion is not just about the feeling of an aggrieved party, it's also about what are the actual intentions and practices and policies of an organization or an institution, and what are the impacts that those policies are having. And so an organization can be intentionally inclusive or not. That is a choice that an institution or organization makes. And I think sometimes we're focusing a lot on how people feel, and we all know that feelings don't change policies.
But I'm just trying to bring a point to what you just said. So you're saying feelings don't change policies, votes change policies? If people vote?
Sometimes. Sometimes.
Because you can lose too.
And sometimes you can win and still the policies don't change. Right? So that feelings alone, votes alone don't change policies, but institutions change policy, and sometimes tearing down institutions have changed policies. We are a country founded in revolution, founded in rebellion, saying this doesn't work for us. So we don't want to do this anymore. We're going to start something new.
So is it the case that politics 2016 could be inclusive, could not be inclusive, but people, especially minorities, are saying it doesn't work for us?
I think there are many there is no one answer for any community. I think there are some who will choose to participate through community organizing, some who will choose to participate through voting, some will choose to participate through both, some of us will choose to participate through our academic research, some of us will choose to participate in who we talk to and what we say to the people in our community, that there are multiple, I think true inclusion means that there are multiple ways to be present, and we need to honor all of those ways, and we can critique, I come from a community of people that if you say you don't vote, people look at you real funny. But I have to learn, we have to learn that that's not the only, we all know that voting doesn't mean we're gonna get what we want. Many of us have worked really hard to elect people and watch the things that we thought we elected them for not happen. So we know that it is not the answer. It is a part of a process.
So let me argue. I'm going to argue with you. So what if you don't vote and you still don't get what you want?
But I did. Well, again, that happens too, right? Both happen. We have to acknowledge that both. You can vote and nothing changes. You cannot vote and nothing changes, or it might get worse.
Well,
Sometimes we voted and it got worse. Let me go back to Ms.
Clyburn. You know elected politics. Your family knows elected politics. How do you respond to this?
The answer is E, and I agree. It is all of the above, because, what is that igniter of change? And, where is that idea or concept sparked? And, we don't live in vacuums, thank goodness, if we allow ourselves to be open. And so what you're saying, how do I justify my positions at the FCC or beyond? Data, where does data come? Research, how do I get, how are problems or challenges in our communities that I should address? How do I find out about it? Activists and others and disenfranchised groups let me know. So all of those things, I think, are facilitators, and it's almost like church. How do you, we're just coming off the Easter season. How do you, really save souls if that's your objective? You've got to meet people where they are. And that is at the, foundationally, what we're talking about in terms of being facilitators of change, those who are stagnant and those who want wholesale change. Somewhere, in order to get change, in order to educate both and to bring about, the betterment, if that's your goal, somehow we both need to move to that center, and that is how we facilitate.
Okay, but I just don't, in the spirit of the Easter season, I don't forgive people who don't sacrifice for the greater good. And if people tell me, oh, you know, you got to understand, you got to be kind to people who choose not to vote and not to participate. They have other ways that they make themselves heard. I think they are giving up power and the opportunity to create change.
Well, if you go back to the prodigal son and the rest, you know, and those other stories, now you got to know that you don't know what tomorrow brings, and no one, you know, that you don't know what that spark or influence will be. And maybe that person's stagnation is what drives you harder.
Drives you harder, but
you harder.
And
the
so
one
you,
who is
you ignore them or you forgive them for not voting.
You learn from them, and you sometimes, you know, it causes you to be, you know, more committed or more driven because of them. You know, everything and every element, I believe, I don't know if I'm becoming more cosmic in my older age, but which I had a birthday last week, which y'all missed, but that's another thing. But, you know, I guess what I'm saying is every encounter, if you allow it to be a learning experience that will propel the two of you. And maybe that person who does not exercise their franchise in that way, maybe your influence to them will empower them or enable them or open their minds in other ways.
Okay. Yes.
My name is Joy Cheney, and I run an organization called Equal Pay Today, and I'm so glad to be here. And I'm glad I have a job that allows me to sit at the Aspen Institute Symposium on State of Race in America. But most people don't have the opportunity to be here. They don't want to protest. They don't want to be a part of a movement. They want to be able to work. They don't want any free stuff. They want to be able to get a job. They want to be able to earn whatever it is that they want. They want to send their children to good schools. They want to be paid fairly. They don't want to be sexually harassed at work. It's really basic stuff. And I think that all of us, whether it's in the political class or those of us who are in the media or the advocacy organizations, I think we speak way over people's heads. And not because we're smarter than they are, but because we're not engaged in what they're engaging in every single day. And so when we talk about going back to the question of why aren't people voting, I think that sometimes, I'm a Clinton supporter, but I think that sometimes all politicians, they're not talking to people about what they're dealing with on an everyday basis. They're not telling a story of how policies that are set at the federal level impact their everyday life. And even local politicians aren't talking about policies that are set at the state and local level. How does that impact their everyday life? The media doesn't bring out advocacy groups and organizations that represent them that they actually know. The councilwoman who talked about the fact that we talk about African American voters as if all African American voters are the same. A middle class, upper middle class African American voter is extremely different from a working class African American voter, and within the Asian American community, all of the diversity that is in that. And we talk so generally, and that is immediately a person's like, well, they don't know what I'm going through because they're lumping me all in one category. There's a real gap in between what real people are dealing with and what our politicians are talking about, what the media covers,
so are
and
you
what
making,
advocacy groups
so here's
are
the
talking
question.
about.
Here's the question from my perspective. Are you making excuses for people who don't get involved and see that the political structure is how change is most often concretely achieved in
No
America?
excuses. Every individual has the responsibility to vote. I believe in voting, no excuses. That said, if our goal is to get more people to vote, we've got to meet them where they are. My mother's a pediatrician from Orlando, Florida, and she had one motto: you meet the patient where they are. And so you can't say to people, you should be doing this, you should be doing you, and you're not understanding what really is going on in their individual lives. Yes, there are voting rights issues that are keeping them from being able to vote, but there are also things like, where do I take my kid while I go and vote? I worked in Florida during an election year. You're gonna have your child standing in line with you 5, 6, 7 hours? That sounds good if you're protest oriented. That sounds really inspirational. But in a practical level, it's 90 degrees in November in Florida. You're gonna have your kid out there with you all day? That's a real thing.
You know, again, I just come back to, I would think that you would find a way to make sure that the kid, there was some way to take care of that kid. But I'm not gonna make excuses for people who say, you know. So, Mayor Nutter, you went out of the room. And And I said, you know, now there's somebody who doesn't understand inclusion, doesn't understand the power of participation. But we've been having a very spirited conversation here about whether or not you make excuses for people who say, voting's not the be-all and end-all. I participate in other ways. Am I being fair here? No? Go ahead. Wait. So somebody who says, oh no, you're not being fair, tell Mayor Nutter what you think is a fair assessment of where this conversation has been going. Go ahead.
My assessment is this, and I'm going to be practical.
Yeah.
I vote. I'm going to vote. Everybody in my family is going to vote. But after years of voting, when you have people stand, number one, we've watched 8 years of President Obama disrespected. So if my vote matters, you should not even think about disrespecting the president.
Is that a reason then to stop voting?
No, I'm not going to stop.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying you have to see it how other people may, those that don't, because they don't see the difference being made.
Let me give
if
Natasha
you
a
have
chance.
somebody standing up there saying Americans want this, when they're saying only people that look like me and think like me are Americans.
Well, so how does that help if you don't vote?
It may not, but you have to look at how people feel. It's
Okay.
not going to make a difference.
How people feel as opposed to how people vote. All right,
So,
go ahead.
I kind of conceptualize the issue in this way. It's not about should you vote or shouldn't you. You know, people should vote. And how was that vote won, right? People said, wait a minute, I'm being oppressed. The way that I would not be oppressed is if I get the right to vote, then I have representation in Congress and other places, and so my voice will be heard. So people got the right to vote. Now, people are saying nothing has changed. And what they realized is, oh, maybe the rules changed. Maybe the rules changed. So people got the right to vote, but if districts have been gerrymandered, right, then I don't have that representation that I thought I was going to have. If we have voting laws, voting ID laws, that these are structural barriers that stop people from having access. Why do people have to opt in? Why not have people opt out? I mean, we make it so easy for people to vote for American Idol and everything else, you know, and we can do it in our home, we can do it on the computer, people figure out how to do what they want to do. So what I'm questioning is, it's the structural issues, it's the structural barriers that are in place that are stopping people from engaging. We have,
Hold on. Let me just ask you this.
But
Let
if
me
we
just
had
say-
ballots.
Hang on. President Obama got so many minorities, specifically African Americans, to turn out, record numbers. But now you're saying to me, and I think I'm hearing this from you too, well, some people feel like, well, that didn't create change and the vote really didn't make a difference. Is that right?
Here's the thing. All politics is local. And so when we start looking at what's happening locally, right, how people are engaged locally, if I go to my polling place and I get the ballot and it says, you know, choose 3 out of these 5 for the judges, and I don't know who these judges are, is that just, so am I making an informed choice, or am I saying, oh, well, I'm just going to choose these names that I think are okay, and I don't know who I'm voting for? Now I've just maybe possibly elected judges who, when there are cases that come before them, are not going to make good choices that are based in equity and access for people of color. So there's structural things that are happening where people are not making informed choices, where people are being pushed out of the electorate, and those things have to be addressed if we want to see change. It's not just that people don't want to be engaged. There have to be structural changes, and my question is, do the powers that be really want that? Do they really want those groups to be engaged in the process?
Well, I think the answer is people who have power want to hold on to power, exercise power to their advantage. But if you choose not to vote, I think that that's a pretty big step. But I hear in this audience, though, people saying, well,
I can say one other thing. I think it's also voting, but there are other ways to be engaged in the political process. So how does the information go out to be selected to be a poll worker? How does the information go out to be selected to be election judge?
well, if you're not involved, you wouldn't know.
But the point is the information being provided in a way, meeting people where they are so that they can get involved? And I don't know if they really want folks to be involved in that way, to hold on to power.
So the emphasis of inclusion here, as I hear it, is much more in saying the system is not doing outreach to make sure that people feel that they are wanted and included in politics 2016.
Not even feel. You know what? You can hurt my feelings. I don't care. But it's no. So when I was a young girl, my mom dragged me around. We were signing petitions. Mom, when I go home, no, come on, we got to go. So I understand these things, but what I'm saying is it shouldn't be, just like we say in education, it shouldn't be an accident of geography. It shouldn't be an accident that you just happen to get it. It needs to be, this is the information, transparency, and this is how we move forward as a community to have inclusion in the political process.
All right, so Mayor Nutter, I think now you've heard what you missed. People really are saying there's other ways to participate, other ways to value inclusion, and it's not just the vote. What are you saying?
So I know we're under time pressure. A couple things. I would say very quickly, from a very personal standpoint, I don't think there's ever any real excuse or justification for not voting. Having said that, many of the things that I did here, I've questioned back home, for instance, why do we vote on Tuesday? Who decided that? Why not Monday? Why not Wednesday? Why not Saturday, right? Yeah, right, or early voting. Some states have it. I was on the radio for my candidate yesterday. Wisconsin's election's coming up, but early voting is going on right now, right? In Pennsylvania, when we had the voter ID law, they wanted no voting, right? Not early voting. So, who makes these decisions? Well, for us in Pennsylvania, that'd be the General Assembly. What day you vote, how long the polls are open, do you have early voting, not early voting, all of these kinds of decisions. But you can be halfway around the world and do your banking transactions. And for the most part, unless somebody hacks the system, they're safe and secure. But you won't let me, vote in that way. Or I could do the American Idol thing where I think recently more people voted.
You don't have absentee voting in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, absentee voting if you're not going to be there that day.
Oh, that day. Okay.
But there are states in America where you start voting 2 weeks before Election Day. We don't have that. So, unless everybody's going to be away. So fine. Yes, President Obama gets elected, and folks say, this is going to change now. Because, we got first black president, and it's all going to be good. So, now we're post-racial, blah, blah, blah. He walks into the Great Recession. All that peace, love, and happiness, a month later, went out the window when I mentioned earlier, not one House Republican voted for the economic stimulus plan, and only 3 Senate Republicans voted for it. So, nice seeing you, Mr. Barack Obama. Welcome to being President of the United States of America. So, I think that voting does matter. Yes, there are districts that are gerrymandered, but not when it comes to voting for the mayor of the city. We had low voter turnout in our most recent election last year, not when it comes to governor, and certainly not when it comes to President of the United States of America. Change takes time. Now, are we where we want to be? No. Are we where we used to be? No. And in the interim between those 2 points, change has happened, a lot of which came because people were voting and paying attention.
Okay, so it's time to wrap this up, this session on Inclusion in Politics 2016. We had panels today on politics on the campus and inclusion, racial inclusion, gender inclusion, identity inclusion on the campus. Then we had a session on neighborhoods and fast-changing neighborhoods and how to maintain a sense of belonging, inclusion again in the neighborhoods. Richard, you raised your hand. You want to finish us up here?
I just couldn't help here, Juan, because you started, and you kept us right on point of this idea of inclusion, and we started to also discuss participation. And it was a great conversation. We made it around the room this way and this way and this way and this way now. And I think it's that happy tension between the two, because they're different, right? Inclusion and participation. Count me. I need to be counted, right? You get counted or you say count me. And I think that's really interesting, because I think of the AAPI community where they don't say anything and they don't do anything, generally speaking. They try their best. But they got counted in the census, so now they say, you need to be counted. So I think of this discussion of inclusion and participation, right, whether you vote or whether you wait for somebody to say, I'm going to include you, is that neat symbiotic situation when we talk about that idea of inclusion or participation for communities of color. And that is that cycle that either spirals down or spirals up, depending when you hop in the pool. And it doesn't matter where, whether it's going to be the inclusion side or the participation side, but they work together so well.
Well, this is a great way to do it, because I find Asian Pacific Islander community, I mean, for the longest time, you saw numbers rising, but participation not. Now I think that people are much more inclined to understand that they belong and they're part of the American political structure, and that then boosts actual voter turnout and participation. But the key is, again, from the perspective of Aspen Institute, from this perspective of this State of Race session, is that we're aware of what the voices in this room are saying and how they reflect larger sentiments in the broader society. And that's why I so much appreciate the fact that you took the time to participate today. Let me turn it back over.
And I want to thank Juan Williams for his great moderation, his provocative. Thank you all. Speaking of participation, thank you for participating, including the online audience and the C-SPAN audience who will see this, and the Twitter hashtag State of Race. I hope that debate and discussion will continue, and I hope we will continue this discussion over lunch as we break bread together in the next room. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for all the panelists and the moderators, and Richard Louis and Ray Suarez and Juan Williams and Comcast Corporation. Thank you.